What's up, guys? Welcome to No Harry. We've got something special today. What if Charles Xavier found Harry at age 5 and the X-Men dismantled every Auror in Britain? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The Burning Boy. The first thing Cerebro ever said about Harry Potter was that it couldn't be right. Charles Xavier had been running the machine for 11 years. He had mapped the psychic landscape of every continent, catalogued mutant signatures from Sao Paulo to Siberia, and learned to read the readout the way a conductor reads a score, each mind a note, some bright, some dim, some wildly, beautifully off-key. He knew what the machine sounded like when it found someone extraordinary. He knew the particular quality of a signature that made him sit forward in his chair. He was not prepared for what happened when Cerebro found the boy in Surrey. The helmet had barely settled onto his head when the signal hit him like a freight train. Not a psychic attack, nothing hostile about it at all, just raw, unfiltered presence. A mind so luminous it was almost painful to touch. The way staring directly into the sun wasn't dangerous so much as simply more than human eyes were designed to handle. Xavier pulled back instinctively, recalibrated, and approached again, more carefully this time. The signal didn't diminish. It pulsed. It breathed. It had the quality of something alive in a way that most minds, even extraordinary ones, didn't quite achieve, as though whoever this was existed more completely than other people, occupied their own space in reality with a density and weight that bent the psychic landscape around them the way a star bent light. And they were 5 years old. Xavier sat very still for a long moment inside the blue dark of Cerebro's chamber, the hum of the machine around him, the globe of the world stretching out in every direction, and he focused on the coordinates with the precision he'd spent decades developing. Surrey, England. A quiet street. A row of identical houses with identical gardens and identical, carefully maintained sameness. He pressed a little deeper, gently, the way you might put your hand near a flame without touching it. The mind he found was awake despite the hour. It was nearly midnight in England, and it was doing something remarkable. It was drawing. Not with paper and pencil. Xavier understood within seconds that the child had no paper. He was drawing with thought, constructing elaborate geometric shapes in the space behind his eyes with the kind of focused, absorbed concentration most adults couldn't sustain for 30 seconds. The shapes moved. They connected and separated and evolved according to an internal logic Xavier couldn't fully decode, but could feel the beauty of, the way you could appreciate music in a language you didn't speak. And threaded through all of it, underneath the luminous geometric play of a brilliant child's imagination, was something else. Something that made Xavier's jaw tighten and his hands grip the arms of his chair. Pain. Old pain. The kind that had been there long enough to become part of the furniture, so that the child no longer noticed it unless he looked directly at it, and had learned not to look directly at it. Xavier withdrew from Cerebro slowly. Sat in the dark. Then he turned the chair toward the door and called for Logan. Logan was in the garage when the professor's voice appeared in his head, clean and precise the way Xavier's mental communication always was, no static, no bleed, just the words and the particular quality of the professor's concern underneath them, which was somehow more urgent than the words themselves. My office. Please. The please was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Logan wiped grease from his hands, set down the carburetor he'd been cleaning, and headed inside. Xavier was already at his desk when Logan arrived, the Cerebro readout open on the screen in front of him, and Logan could read the room before the professor said a single word. 12 years of proximity had given him that. The professor's face was very still and very calm in the way it got when he was managing something that had disturbed him deeply. Surrey, England, Xavier said, without preamble. A child. 5 years old. Logan pulled out a chair and sat, which was his way of indicating he was listening. His mutant signature is unlike anything Cerebro has ever registered. Xavier paused. I want to be precise about that. I'm not speaking in approximations. In 11 years, that machine has never produced a reading like this one. The closest comparison would be Jean, at her highest recorded output, amplified by a factor I'm genuinely not comfortable estimating. Logan was quiet for a moment. A 5-year-old. Yes. And the other thing, Logan said, because there had been an other thing in the way the professor said disturbed, and Logan had learned to follow those threads. What's the other thing? Xavier looked at the screen instead of at Logan for a moment. The mind I found is extraordinary. Joyful, even, there's a quality to his thinking that's almost exuberant, even now, even at midnight. Children are resilient in ways that are sometimes heartbreaking to witness. He turned back. He's living in conditions of sustained emotional and physical deprivation. I can't assess from a distance how severe without conducting a proper evaluation. But severe enough that I'm not inclined to leave him there while I make phone calls and file paperwork. Logan stood up. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning, Xavier said. I want Scott with us. And I want this done carefully, Logan. No. I wasn't going to, you had a specific expression on your face. Logan did not dignify this with a response. He went to the door, then stopped. You said his mutant signature. But something in the way you said it, there's something else in the signal, Xavier said. Something I don't have a framework for yet. It doesn't present like any mutation I've catalogued. It feels almost like a second mind, living alongside the first. Separate in kind but completely integrated. As though he's two things at once and both of them are genuinely, fully him. Logan thought about this. You've never seen that before. No, Xavier said. Which is why I want to meet him. They drove to Heathrow rather than flying the Blackbird. Xavier's preference, when possible, was to enter situations like this one without announcing themselves from the sky. Scott drove. Logan sat in the back and did not sleep, though the flight was 7 hours, because Logan rarely slept on planes and never slept before something that felt like this. The professor spent most of the flight reading, or appearing to read, which Logan had long understood were different activities. When Xavier appeared to be reading, he was usually thinking through multiple scenarios simultaneously, which he found easier with something to anchor his eyes to. Logan had once asked him about it. Xavier had said, somewhat dryly, that it was a habit he'd developed at Oxford and had never managed to break, and that it also discouraged other passengers from making conversation. They landed at Heathrow on a grey English morning, the sky the particular dense white of a country that had committed to clouds as a lifestyle choice, and rented a car. Privet Drive looked exactly like what it was, a street designed by someone who found comfort in replication. Every house the same shape. Every garden the same tidy measurements. Every car washed to the same level of acceptable cleanliness. Logan stepped out of the rental and looked at the row of number 4s and 5s and 6s and felt the particular discomfort he always felt in places that tried too hard to signal normalcy, because in his experience, places that tried that hard usually had something to hide. Number 4 was indistinguishable from its neighbors, which was presumably the point. Xavier wheeled himself up the front path, Scott beside him, Logan a half step behind and to the left out of habit. The garden was aggressively neat. There were flowers in the window box that had probably been selected to be uncontroversial. The doorbell chimed with the sound of something that wanted to be cheerful. The man who opened the door was enormous, not in any impressive way, but in the way of someone who had eaten well for many years and was proud of it. Pink-faced. Small, suspicious eyes. A mustache that was doing its best to compensate for something. He looked at Xavier in the wheelchair, looked at Scott in his ruby glasses, looked at Logan, and seemed to arrive at several wrong conclusions in rapid succession. Whatever you're selling, he said, we don't want any. My name is Charles Xavier, the professor said pleasantly. I'm not selling anything. I'd like to speak with you about your nephew. May we come in? Something flickered across Vernon Desley's face. Logan caught it, not guilt, nothing that sophisticated. More like the look of a man who has been maintaining a particular lie and has just felt it shift under his feet. Don't know what you'd want with the boy, Desley said, not moving from the doorway. He's fine. Normal. Healthy. "I'm sure he is," Xavier said, in the same pleasant tone. "May we come in?" They came in. The house was exactly as Logan had expected, relentlessly ordered in a way that had the feel of performance, every surface clean enough to suggest that cleanliness was being used as a moral statement. There were family photographs on the walls, and Logan clocked them as they moved through the hallway to the sitting room. A large blonde woman. The pink-faced man. A boy, round-faced and self-satisfied in a way that children usually had to be taught. School photos. Holiday photos. Birthday party photos. Not a single photograph of another child. The woman, Petunia, Logan would learn, was perched on the edge of the sofa when they entered, and she had the look of someone who had known this conversation was coming and had been dreading it. Not because she cared. Because she was afraid of consequences. Logan stood in the doorway and let Xavier handle it, because that was the arrangement and it worked. The professor had a quality in conversation that was difficult to describe and impossible to fake, a genuine interest in what other people were thinking, combined with an absolute certainty about his own position, that made most people feel simultaneously understood and gently outmaneuvered. "Where is Harry?" Xavier asked. "Upstairs," Petunia said, too quickly. "Sleeping." "It's 10:30 in the morning," Xavier said. Silence. "I'd like to see him," Xavier said. Vernon Dursley pulled himself up to his full and considerable height. "Now see here. I don't know who you think you are, coming into my house, and I know exactly who I am," Xavier said. The pleasantness in his voice didn't change, but something underneath it did. "And I know what I found when I looked for your nephew, Mr. Dursley. I would very much like to see the child. And I would like you to think very carefully about whether you prefer to have that conversation before or after I've involved the appropriate authorities." This was, Logan knew, not a bluff. Xavier had already made 2 phone calls from the hotel that morning, one to a contact at social services, one to someone at Scotland Yard who owed him a favor from an incident 3 years ago in Edinburgh that Logan himself had been responsible for. The calls were insurance. Xavier preferred not to use insurance, but he had never been naive about human nature. Dursley's face went through several shades before settling on a dark, resistant red. But he looked at his wife, and she looked at her hands, and neither of them moved to stop it when Xavier asked again for the boy. Logan found the cupboard under the stairs himself. He wasn't looking for it. He was moving through the downstairs hallway while Scott helped Xavier maneuver the wheelchair over the threshold into the main room, and he stopped because his nose told him to stop. 5-year-old child. The smell of a small body in a small space. And underneath it, the sharper note of an old bruise, because Logan's senses were not subtle and were not merciful when it came to this kind of information. He looked at the door under the stairs. It had a bolt on the outside. A bolt on the outside of a door the size of a coat closet. He pulled the bolt back. Opened the door. The space inside was perhaps 2 meters long and 1 meter wide. There was a cot, so narrow it was barely a shelf. A thin blanket. A broken toy soldier with one arm missing, standing on a small wooden box as though someone had arranged it very deliberately to guard the space. And curled on the cot, fully dressed because children who sleep in coat closets learn to sleep in their clothes, was the smallest child Logan had ever been angry on behalf of. He was dark-haired and pale, with a face that should have been round with the ordinary fat of childhood and wasn't. There were glasses on his face, large, round, held together at one hinge with tape, that were too big for him. He was asleep, but even in sleep his forehead had a small line between the brows, the ghost of a frown that belonged on someone 3 times his age. On his forehead, half hidden by the dark fringe of hair, was a scar in the shape of a lightning bolt. Logan stood there for a moment in the low light coming through the cupboard door. Then he crouched down so he wasn't looming. He'd learned the hard way that looming was not a good opening position with children who had been hurt, and he said, quietly, "Hey, kid." The boy's eyes opened. Green. Startlingly, electrically green, like something in nature that was trying to communicate something important to anyone looking. He looked at Logan without fear, which told Logan more than anything else could have. Children who had been frightened enough stopped flinching at new things because new things had stopped feeling more dangerous than the things they already knew. "Hi," the boy said. His voice was small and a little rough with sleep. "My name's Logan," Logan said. "I'm Harry," said Harry Potter. "I know. You want to come out of there?" Harry looked at him for a moment, considering, curious, not afraid, and then sat up, folded the thin blanket with a neatness that was heartbreaking because it was automatic, and climbed out of the cupboard. He was very small. Standing up, the top of his head came to Logan's lower ribs. He looked up at Logan through those oversized glasses and Logan looked down at him and neither of them said anything for a moment, and Logan became aware of something odd, a warmth at the edge of his perception, not physical, not the way heat was physical, but present in the same way that heat was present, something radiating outward from the child in a low, steady pulse that Logan didn't have words for because Logan's mutation didn't include psychic sensitivity. Later, the professor would tell him what it was. But standing in the hallway of number 4 Privet Drive, Logan simply registered, something about this child is different in a way that has nothing to do with circumstance. He held out his hand. Harry looked at it, then took it. His hand was very small inside Logan's. They walked into the sitting room together. Charles Xavier looked at Harry Potter and Harry Potter looked at Charles Xavier, and the quality of that look, on both sides, was something Scott would describe later as the most peculiar thing he'd ever witnessed, and he had witnessed a great deal of peculiar things. The professor's expression shifted. Not much. Xavier was a man of formidable control and considerable practice at not showing his interior on his exterior. But Scott had worked alongside him for 6 years and he caught it, the fractional softening around the eyes, the slight deepening of the breath, that meant Xavier had just touched something with his mind and found it was exactly as remarkable as he'd expected. Harry, for his part, looked at Xavier the way he'd looked at Logan, curious, evaluating, unafraid, but with an additional quality that was harder to define. He looked at Xavier the way you look at someone you've been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. "Hello, Harry," Xavier said. "Hello," Harry said. "You're in a wheelchair." "I am," Xavier agreed. "Does it hurt?" "No. Not anymore." Harry seemed to accept this with the simple practicality of a child for whom the world had long since stopped arranging itself for comfort. He looked at Petunia, who was looking at the window, and at Vernon, who was looking at the floor, and then back at Xavier. Something in his face was doing quick, quiet calculations. "Are you here because of me?" Harry asked. "Yes," Xavier said. "Because of the things I do." Xavier tilted his head slightly. "Gentle. What sort of things?" Harry glanced at his aunt and uncle. "Things I'm not supposed to do," he said carefully. "Things that aren't normal." Vernon made a noise. It was the noise of a man who had been given an opening and was about to misuse it. "Freak," he started, "that's exactly right, and if you've come to take this, Mr. Dursley," Xavier said, and his voice was still pleasant and perfectly level and somehow it still cut Vernon off completely. "I'll ask you not to use that word in front of the child again." The temperature in the room changed. Not literally. But Logan shifted his weight and Scott straightened slightly and the Dursleys both went very quiet in the way that people go quiet when they realize that the balance of a situation has moved without them noticing. Harry watched all of this with those bright, precise green eyes. "I'm here because I found you," Xavier said, turning back to him. "I was looking for people with special abilities. And when I found you, I wanted to meet you." "How did you find me?" Harry asked. "I have a machine," Xavier said. "A remarkable machine. It helps me look for minds like yours." Harry processed this. "You can read minds?" "Sometimes. With permission, mostly." "Can you read mine?" I touched it. Briefly. I wanted to ask first before doing anything more. Xavier smiled, the particular, slightly rueful Xavier smile that meant genuine warmth. "You have a remarkable mind, Harry. The kind I've only ever found once or twice before." Harry was quiet for a moment. A small hand came up and pushed the tape-repaired glasses up his nose. "Uncle Vernon says I'm a freak," he said, without particular emotion, stating a fact. "And Aunt Petunia says the same thing, but she doesn't say the word. She just says I'm like my mother." Something moved behind Petunia's eyes. Something complicated. Xavier looked at her steadily but said nothing. "Your mother," Xavier said to Harry, "was extraordinary, if what I understand is true. What do you think of being like her?" Harry thought about this seriously, the way children think about things seriously when they haven't yet been taught that seriousness is somehow excessive. "I think," he said, "that if being like her is why they keep me in the cupboard, she must have been something worth being." Logan, standing in the doorway, said nothing. But his jaw was doing something. Xavier looked at Harry for a long moment. Then he turned his chair slightly, toward Vernon Dursley, and the pleasant quality of his voice changed into something else, not threatening, not raised, but utterly, definitively final. "Mr. Dursley," he said. "I'm going to take Harry with me." Vernon Dursley's face went from red to purple. "You can't just, I can." Xavier didn't raise his voice. He never did, when it mattered. "I have documentation from the appropriate authorities indicating that the conditions of this child's care warrant investigation. The documentation was filed this morning. The investigation would, at minimum, result in Harry's immediate removal from your custody and placement with foster services. Alternatively, you can agree to a voluntary transfer of guardianship to a suitable institution, in this case, my school in New York, which is considerably less disruptive for everyone involved, and which carries no formal record of the investigation." He let that settle. "I'm not interested in ruining you," Xavier said, and he meant it. "I'm interested in Harry. Those are two entirely separate things, and I've chosen to keep them separate because I think that's the right thing to do. But I want to be honest with you, I have found a child sleeping in a cupboard under your stairs, wearing clothes 3 sizes too large, who is visibly malnourished by any clinical standard, and who is clearly being told on a regular basis that his fundamental nature is something to be ashamed of. So my patience for this particular negotiation is limited. What's your answer?" Silence. Petunia Dursley said, very quietly, "Take him." Vernon turned to his wife. She looked out the window and didn't look back. "Take him," she said again. "I knew this day would come. I've known since the letter. Since Lily." She said the name with the complicated bitterness of a woman who had spent 20 years being angry about something she couldn't quite justify being angry about. "Take him and keep him away from Dudley and don't," she stopped. "Start it again. Just go." Harry was listening to all of this. His face was very still. He wasn't surprised. Logan watched him and saw the stillness of a child who had understood for a long time that he was a problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be managed, and who had built his interior life entirely independently of that knowledge, sealed off from it, in the geometric shapes he drew behind his eyes at midnight. Xavier looked at Harry. "Do you have anything you want to bring?" Harry thought about it. Then he went back to the cupboard under the stairs and came back with the one-armed toy soldier. He held it up. "His name is Captain," he said. "He's been here longer than I have." "Then he comes with us," Xavier said. Harry nodded. He looked at his aunt and uncle one more time. Not with anger. Not with the dramatic weight that the moment might have warranted. With the simple, clear-eyed assessment of a 5-year-old who was very good at seeing things as they actually were. "Bye," he said. Neither of them answered. He walked out of number 4 Privet Drive between Logan and Scott, holding the one-armed toy soldier, and he didn't look back. They ate lunch at a small restaurant near the motorway, the kind of place with plastic menus and a dessert display that rotated slowly and was somehow always exciting regardless of what was actually in it. Harry sat across from Xavier and ate his way through a bowl of soup and 2 bread rolls and a slice of chocolate cake with the focused, deliberate attention of a child who had not always been given enough and had learned not to take enough for granted. Logan watched him eat and said nothing. Scott pretended to study the menu. "Can I ask you something?" Harry said, addressing Xavier directly, between the soup and the cake. "You can ask me anything," Xavier said. "The things I do." He paused. Adjusted his glasses. "The floaty things, when I'm scared. And the time the teacher's wig came off when she was mean to Marcus Wyndham and I was angry. And the time I climbed onto the roof of the school kitchen and I don't remember jumping." He recited these events with the careful precision of someone who had been assembling a private record for some time. "Are those because of my mind? Like what you have?" "They might be some of them," Xavier said. "There are people in this world, Harry, who are born with abilities that go beyond what most people consider normal. They're called mutants. I'm one. Logan is one. I believe you might be one." Harry ate a spoonful of cake. "What's Logan's ability?" "Metal bones," Logan said, from beside him. "And I heal." Harry looked at him with immediate, genuine interest. "Like if you broke your arm?" "Like if I broke both arms and my ribs and got stabbed through the chest." Harry's eyes widened. He looked at Xavier. "And yours?" "I can reach into other people's minds," Xavier said. "Read them. Speak to them. Occasionally, if necessary, influence them." "You didn't influence Uncle Vernon, though," Harry said. "Not accusatory. Observational. No. He made his own choice." Harry thought about this while he ate more cake. "I think," he said slowly, "that my things might be different from yours. The floaty things feel different from the—" He touched his temple with one finger, a gesture that was uncannily adult, "the mind things. The one is like—" He struggled for words, the way children do when they're reaching for concepts they have no vocabulary for yet. "Like pushing. And the other is like knowing." Xavier looked at him very carefully. "Tell me about the knowing." Harry set his spoon down. He looked at Xavier with those green eyes that seemed lit from somewhere behind them. "I knew you were coming," he said. "Not today. Not exactly. But I knew someone was coming. Someone who thought the same way I do." He paused. "Is that strange?" "Remarkable," Xavier said. "Not strange." Harry seemed to decide this was satisfactory. He picked his spoon back up. Logan leaned back in his chair and exchanged a look with Scott across the table. Scott's expression, behind the ruby glasses, was one Logan translated as "What have we gotten ourselves into?" Logan's response expression was "Something good, I think." "Maybe. Probably. There's something else," Xavier said. He chose his words with care. "Harry, you said your aunt sometimes says you're like your mother. Do you know anything about your parents?" The small face didn't flinch. Just processed. "They died in a car crash," Harry said. "That's what Uncle Vernon says. My dad was drunk and crashed the car and that's why they're dead and that's why I have the scar." He touched his forehead. "But I don't think that's true. Because whenever I touch the scar I think about green light, and I've never been in a car crash but I have been near green light, I think, when I was very small. And the scar doesn't feel like a car crash. It feels like something aimed." The table was very quiet. Xavier's composure remained intact, but only just. He had known, coming here, some of the background. He'd done research on the Potters before boarding the flight, had found references in certain very obscure British documents to an incident in Godric's Hollow in 1981 that the official record listed as a gas explosion but that shared no characteristics of a gas explosion. He had theories. They were alarming theories. But to hear a 5-year-old describe the moment of his parents' murder with the calm clarity of someone who had spent years quietly examining his own most fundamental trauma and refusing to be broken by it, we'll talk more about that, Xavier said. When you're ready. Harry nodded. Picked Captain up from the bench beside him and stood the small soldier on the table. He agrees, Harry said, speaking for Captain with the complete seriousness of a child who had spent a great deal of time alone and had made his entertainments accordingly. Captain thinks we should talk about it. He says it's important not to hide from important things. Logan made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to one. Captain is wise, Xavier said. He is, Harry agreed. He's been in the cupboard a very long time. It makes you think about things. On the plane back to New York, Harry fell asleep in the seat beside Xavier, curled on his side with Captain held loosely in one hand, the one-armed soldier standing watch in the air. He slept with the total, unself-conscious depth of a child who hadn't slept well in a long time and had now decided, based on some internal assessment, that this was a safe place to do so. Xavier sat beside him and didn't read. Didn't appear to read. Logan had the seat across the aisle and he wasn't sleeping either. He looked at the boy, then at Xavier. You're going to need to tell him about the wizarding world, he said, quietly enough not to wake Harry. Eventually. Eventually, Xavier agreed. And they're going to come looking. Yes. People like that. People who think they own a kid because of a prophecy or whatever. Logan's voice was flat, carrying the particular neutrality of a man who had strong opinions he was choosing to express as facts. They come looking, Charles. You know that. I know that, Xavier said. So what do we do? Xavier looked at Harry sleeping. At the scar on his forehead. At the one-armed soldier. At the thin face that was already, even in sleep, beginning to lose some of its careful guardedness, beginning, in the way of children who have been shown a safe harbor, to simply be. We give him what he should have had from the beginning, Xavier said. We give him the chance to become who he actually is, rather than who circumstances have decided he must be. And if anyone comes looking with the intention of taking that away from him, he paused, then we deal with them accordingly. Logan looked at him. Accordingly. With every resource at our disposal, Xavier said, in the pleasant, level voice that meant exactly what it said and nothing more and nothing less. Logan settled back in his seat. Looked out the dark window at the dark Atlantic far below. Thought about what resources at their disposal meant, when you were talking about Charles Xavier and the X-Men. Okay, he said. Good. Harry Potter slept on, 30,000 feet above the ocean, leaving one world behind him without knowing it, approaching another without knowing that either. The lightning bolt scar caught the cabin light for a moment when he shifted, and then his hair fell across his forehead and covered it, and he was just a small, dark-haired boy asleep in an airplane seat with a broken toy soldier and a future that no longer belonged entirely to someone else's plan. Outside, the stars were ridiculous in number. The kind of night sky you only see from altitude, when the light pollution of everything human falls away and you're reminded that the universe is mostly dark and cold and vast, and then reminded, looking at something small and sleeping and alive, that vast isn't the same as empty. Xavier watched the boy sleep. Thought about Cerebro. Thought about that signal, that burning, breathing, double-natured signal that had no precedent in 11 years of mapping the world's extraordinary minds. Two things at once, he had told Logan, and both of them are genuinely, fully him. He didn't know yet what the second thing was. He had theories. In the weeks and months ahead, as Harry settled into the institute and began to unfold into himself the way children do when they're given space to grow, the theories would become hypotheses and then certainties and then something that required an entirely new framework to understand. But for now, 30,000 feet above the ocean, Charles Xavier simply watched a child sleep and thought, whatever you are, Harry Potter, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. Not because a prophecy said so. Because a man in a wheelchair had looked at a burning, beautiful mind and chosen, without hesitation, to do something about it. That was all. That was enough. That was, in the end, the thing that would change everything. Chapter 2, The Shape of a Person. The institute smelled like chalk and coffee and, on certain afternoons, whatever Bobby Drake had accidentally frozen in the kitchen when he was startled. Harry learned this in his first week, and he catalogued it alongside everything else he was cataloguing: the way sunlight came through the east corridor in the mornings and laid long gold rectangles across the hardwood floor, the specific creak of the third stair from the bottom, the sound Logan's boots made on gravel at 5:30 a.m. when he went out to run, the way the professor's study felt different from every other room in the building, warmer somehow, denser, like more thinking had happened inside it than the architecture alone could account for. Harry was, at his core, a noticer. He had spent 5 years in a house where noticing things kept you out of trouble, where reading the temperature of a room before you entered it was survival skill rather than mere curiosity. He had simply learned to notice more things than most children, and to notice them better, and to build from what he noticed a detailed and accurate model of the world around him. The Xavier Institute expanded that world by an order of magnitude, and Harry took to it with the specific hunger of a child who had been starved of exactly this. On his third day, he met Aurora Monroe in the garden. She was standing with her eyes closed and her hands slightly raised, and the clouds above the school were moving in a way that clouds don't move without assistance. Harry stood at the garden's edge and watched for 10 full minutes without saying anything, until Storm opened her eyes and found him there. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked. 10 minutes, Harry said. "I didn't want to break your concentration." She looked at him for a moment, this small, serious, bespectacled child who was vibrating with the contained energy of someone who had approximately 40 questions and was exercising enormous restraint about all of them. "You can ask," she said. He asked 6 questions in under 2 minutes. She answered all of them. By the end of the conversation he had learned 3 things about cloud formation, 1 thing about the atmospheric pressure differential required to generate rain, and 1 thing about Storm herself, that she liked people who watched carefully before they spoke, because most people never did. "You can come back tomorrow," she said. "If you'd like to watch again." Harry came back every morning for a week. He met Scott properly on day 5, when he discovered Scott in the basement shooting range, and asked what the room was for, and Scott explained, and Harry asked if he could try. Scott said no. Harry asked why not. Scott said because you're 5. Harry said Logan was letting him throw knives in the garage. There was a pause. Then Scott went upstairs to have a word with Logan, and Harry sat on the shooting range floor and waited, and when Scott came back he taught Harry the basic principles of targeting instead, which Harry grasped with a speed that made Scott's eyebrows do something complicated behind his visor. He met Jean on day 7, and this was different from all the others. Jean Grey was 16, red-haired, kind in the instinctive way that some people are kind without having decided to be. It came out of her the way light comes out of something that happens to be luminous. She found Harry in the library, sitting on the floor in the fiction section with 3 books open simultaneously and his brow furrowed in concentration, cross-referencing something in a way that no 5-year-old had any business doing. "What are you reading?" she asked, crouching down. "The Greek myths," Harry said, "and a book about astronomy, and a book about Old Norse." He looked up. "I wanted to see which gods are the same." Jean sat down on the floor beside him without being asked. They spent 2 hours in the library. Jean realized about 20 minutes in that she was not explaining things to the child so much as discussing them with him, which was unusual for a 5-year-old and not unusual for Harry, who existed in his own particular developmental category. What she also noticed, and reported to Xavier later with a careful, slightly odd precision, was that twice during their conversation Harry had answered a question she hadn't asked yet. Not dramatically. Not with fanfare. He'd just answered it, seamlessly woven into whatever he was already saying, as though he'd heard it through the air between intention and speech. Xavier listened to Jean's account with his chin resting on his steepled fingers and said, "Yes. I thought so." "He's reading surface thoughts," Jean said. "Without trying," Xavier said. "Without knowing he's doing it. The access is completely natural. Like breathing." He paused. "It's going to be the most important thing we teach him to control. Not because he'll use it badly, I don't think he will, but because a mind that that naturally receptive, is going to need walls, or the noise of other people's thinking will simply become everything. Jean thought about this. She thought about what it would mean to have no wall between yourself and the constant hum of human interior noise, every fear, every judgment, every small cruelty and small kindness broadcasting constantly into your undefended skull. Poor kid, she said. He doesn't experience it as painful yet, Xavier said. He's too young to differentiate clearly. But he will. And when he does, we need the framework to be there. Logan started teaching Harry to fight when Harry was 6, which Xavier felt was perhaps premature and said so, and Logan said with his characteristic concision that the kid had been sleeping in a box under a staircase for 5 years and the world was not a kind place and premature was a matter of perspective. Xavier conceded the point because he was Charles Xavier and not an idiot. What Logan actually taught Harry, more than fighting, was stillness. There was a difference that most people couldn't articulate between physical stillness and interior stillness, and Logan had found it through decades of violence and its aftermath, and he taught it to Harry the way he did most things, by demonstration rather than explanation, by the slow accumulation of shared mornings rather than lecture. They ran together, Harry's small legs working twice as hard to keep pace, and Logan set the pace to Harry's capacity rather than his own, which he would not have admitted to if asked. They stretched in the cold morning air. Logan showed him where his weight was and where it wasn't, how to stand so that your mass was useful rather than accidental, how to fall without being hurt by falling. Harry was a natural. Not in the flashy, obvious way that some children are natural athletes, not showy about it, not proud about it. He simply absorbed what he was shown and then did it, as though his body had been waiting for the information and was relieved to finally have it. "You're not scared of much," Logan said one morning, when Harry was 7, watching him climb the large oak in the backgrounds with the relaxed focus of someone who had made peace with heights. "Should I be?" Harry called down. "Most kids your age are scared of falling." Harry looked down from his considerable height. Looked back up. "I know I won't fall," he said. "I'd float." He said this completely matter-of-factly, because he had floated on 3 documented occasions and 4 undocumented ones, and floating had stopped being remarkable to him approximately 5 minutes after he understood it wasn't a fluke. "And if something stops the floating?" Logan asked. Harry thought about this seriously. "Then I'd deal with it on the way down," he said. Logan looked up at him for a moment. Kid had an answer for everything. The thing was, it was never a smart aleck answer. Harry had no interest in being clever for the sake of being clever. He simply thought about things and said what he found. Which was, Logan had concluded, considerably more valuable than cleverness. "Come down," Logan said. "I want to show you something." Harry dropped out of the tree. Not climbed, dropped, and landed in a controlled crouch the way Logan had spent 3 months teaching him, weight forward, impact absorbed through the legs and core. He stood up and pushed his glasses up his nose and looked at Logan expectantly. Logan crouched to his level. "I'm going to try to grab you," he said. "Don't let me. Use whatever you've got." Harry's eyes sharpened with interest. "Including," he gestured vaguely, in the direction of the space between them. "Everything," Logan said. "Full package." What happened next was something Logan would describe to Xavier later that evening as the moment I stopped thinking of him as a kid who needed protecting and started thinking of him as a kid I needed to be honest with. Harry waited until Logan moved, let the motion commit, and then did 2 things simultaneously that should not have been simultaneously available to a 7-year-old. He sidestepped with the precise economy of someone who knew exactly how large Logan was and exactly how much margin was required, and he pushed, not physically but with the other thing, the warm pressure thing that felt like the air thickening between them, and Logan, who had fought in actual wars, actually stumbled. Not much. But stumbled. Harry watched him with those bright eyes. "Did I do it right?" "Yeah," Logan said. "You did it right." Xavier taught him to build walls. This was not a metaphor. In the architecture of the mind, containment was structural rather than emotional. You learned to feel where you ended and others began, to locate the membrane of self that sat between your thoughts and the world's, and to make it deliberate. Permeable by choice. Solid by default. Harry took to this the way he took to most things Xavier taught him, with total absorption and the unsettling competence of someone for whom every new skill felt less like acquisition and more like remembering. They sat across from each other in Xavier's study, 3 afternoons a week, and worked. Xavier had taught psychic discipline before, to Jean primarily, but teaching Harry was a fundamentally different experience because Harry's mind was not like Jean's mind. Jean's telepathy was a gift overlaid on an otherwise ordinary human consciousness. Harry's mind was itself different at a structural level. It didn't contain telepathic ability the way a house contains furniture. It was built from it, the way a house is built from its foundations upward. And there was the other thing. The second signal. Do it again, Xavier said one afternoon, when Harry was 8. He had just, without transitioning, without apparent effort, made a book on the shelf behind Xavier move 6 inches to the left in response to Xavier mentioning he couldn't reach it. The moving thing. Harry said. The moving thing. Harry looked at the book. The book moved back 6 inches to the right. Then it floated down from the shelf entirely and landed in Xavier's lap with the gentle precision of someone who understood the concept of fragile. I don't do it the same way I do the mind things, Harry said, which Xavier had already concluded. With the mind things it's like, reaching. With the other thing it's like weight. Like everything has weight and I can feel it and I can adjust it. Adjust it, Xavier said carefully. The gravity, Harry said, simply. Like it's a dial. I can turn it up or down or sideways. Xavier looked at the child across his desk, 8 years old, glasses, capped in the one-armed soldier standing at the corner of the desk where he'd been stationed permanently since month 2, and thought carefully about what Harry had just said. About the implications of a child who experienced telekinesis not as moving things with his mind but as manipulating the fundamental gravitational relationship between objects and the earth. Have you told Logan about the gravity? Xavier asked. He figured it out, Harry said. He said it explained the tree thing. The tree thing? Harry looked briefly like he might be reconsidering disclosure. I climbed the wall of the gym, he said. The outside wall. The vertical part. I see. Logan said it was impressive. Also he said I should mention it to you. Harry paused. I'm mentioning it. Thank you, Xavier said gravely. You're not surprised, Harry observed. I'm not, Xavier admitted. Surprised is not the word. Fascinated might be the word. Harry, I want you to think about something. The moving things, the gravity, the way you can influence objects in space, where does that feel like it comes from? If you had to locate it. Harry put his hand flat on his sternum. Slightly to the left of center. Over his heart but not quite at it. Here, he said. The mind things come from, he touched his temple, here. The other things come from here. The hand on his chest. They feel like separate languages, Xavier said. Yes, Harry said. He looked almost relieved, the way children look when an adult finds the right word for something they've been carrying without being able to name. Exactly like that. I'm fluent in both but they're not the same language. Xavier thought about the lightning bolt scar. Thought about Godric's hollow and green light and a night in 1981 that had rewritten the rules of whatever the wizarding world thought it knew about survivable dark magic. Thought about the theory he'd been developing for 3 years now, quietly, in the small hours, when the Institute was sleeping and he had the space to think about things that didn't yet have answers. The theory was this: Harry Potter was a mutant. Unambiguously, demonstrably, profoundly a mutant. And Harry Potter was also something else, something that had come down through blood and history and a world that existed alongside the human one in deliberate concealment. And on the night in 1981 when something had struck him and should have killed him and didn't, those two things had not just survived. They had fused. They had become integrated in a way that neither system had evolved to accommodate, which produced a child who was both things more completely than any framework could neatly contain. He didn't tell Harry all of this. Not yet. Not because he wanted to withhold. Xavier's approach to Harry had always been radical honesty calibrated to age-appropriate comprehension, but because the full scope of what Harry was would require context Harry didn't have yet, and Xavier believed, profoundly, that a person should have their own foundation before you hand them someone else's mythology. You're both things, Xavier said. Fully both things. That's not a complication, Harry. That's an advantage. But it's also something that requires more from you than either thing alone would require. Harry nodded, taking this in. Then, Professor. Is there a word for the other thing? Not the mutant thing. The other thing? Xavier was quiet for a moment. There is, he said. We'll talk about it when you're a little older. Harry looked at him with those green eyes that missed nothing. How old? Older than 8, Xavier said. Younger than 40. Harry made a face. That's not precise. No, Xavier agreed. It's not. Have patience with me. Harry reached forward and picked up Captain from the corner of the desk, turning the small soldier in his fingers with the habitual comfort of someone reuniting with a familiar object. Captain says patience is important, he said. He also says you're stalling. Captain is perceptive, Xavier said. He has seniority, Harry said. He was in the cupboard for 3 years before I was. Rogue arrived at the institute when Harry was 9, and she arrived the way troubled things often arrive, at night, in the rain, having already decided she wasn't staying. Her name was Anna Marie and she was 16 and she had just destroyed her boyfriend's health with a single kiss and driven him into a coma that the Meridian, Mississippi hospital wasn't sure he'd come out of. She had run from everything she'd ever known and ended up in Westchester because she'd heard there was a place, just a rumor really, a place for people like her. She didn't come in quietly. She came in angry, defensive, and already composing her exit speech, because in her experience the kindest thing that could happen was to be rejected quickly rather than slowly. Harry found her sitting in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, eating cereal, wearing long gloves and long sleeves in August, with the look of someone who had decided that the cereal was the only good thing happening in the universe and was going to concentrate on it exclusively. He was 9. He climbed onto the stool across from her and reached for the cereal box without asking, because he didn't think permission was required for cereal, and poured himself a bowl. Rogue stared at him. Who are you? Harry, he said. Who are you? She stared. She was, Logan would have recognized, already composing reasons why she couldn't form an attachment. Harry didn't know this yet because he was 9, but he knew the stare. He'd worn that stare for 5 years in a house in Surrey and he recognized it from the inside. Anna Marie, she said. Do people call you that or do they call you something else? She paused, surprised that he'd asked. They call me Rogue. Mostly. Why? She looked at her cereal. The gloves. At the space between herself and everything else. Because I'm dangerous to touch, she said, with the bluntness of someone who has decided honesty is easier than explanation. Harry ate cereal. Thought about this. So am I, he said, conversationally. She looked at him sharply. You don't look dangerous. I moved Logan across the training room yesterday, Harry said. He said I'm getting better at not breaking furniture. Last month I broke 4 chairs. Rogue stared at him for a long moment. She was trying to figure out if he was making conversation or making a point, and the honest answer was that he was doing neither, he was simply talking, the way Harry talked, without agenda. He'd learned in the first month at the institute that the loneliest feeling in the world wasn't being in a cupboard. It was being in a room full of people who treated you like a problem. He didn't treat Rogue like a problem. He treated her like someone sitting across the cereal from him, which was what she was. After a while she said, "What's your mutation?" "Several things," Harry said. "You." She held up her gloved hands. "I absorb people. If I touch someone skin to skin, I take their memories, their powers, if they have any. Too long and she stopped. It's bad, Harry said. It's bad, she confirmed. Harry was quiet for a moment, eating cereal. Then, are you staying? I don't know. You should, he said. Logan's grumpy, but he's the best teacher here. Storm can make it rain in June. Bobby Drake is 15 and he once froze his entire bedroom because he had a nightmare, but he's funny when he's not causing ice damage. And the professor is, he paused, searching for the word. The professor is the sort of person you want in your corner. Rogue looked at him. At this small, serious, bespectacled 9-year-old with the matter-of-fact voice and the utter absence of the usual social machinery, the performing of normalcy, the careful management of impression. Why are you awake at 2 a.m., she asked. I sometimes feel the other students dreaming, Harry said. When everyone's asleep the dreams get loud. He tapped his temple. I'm still working on the wall for it. Usually cereal helps. She almost smiled. She caught it before it fully arrived, but it was there. That's the weirdest reason for late-night cereal I've ever heard. What's yours? She looked out the kitchen window at the dark grounds, at the oak Harry had been climbing since he was 7, at the pale suggestion of the moon behind moving clouds. I don't know what I am, she said. Yet. She stopped. That's okay, Harry said. Most people here didn't know what they were when they arrived. They figured it out. Did you? He thought about this, about the conversation with Xavier, about the 2 languages, about the gravity dial and the mind reaching, about the question of the other thing that Xavier had said they'd discuss when he was older. He was still waiting on that conversation. Mostly, he said. There's one part one haven't figured out yet. But the professor says I will. He refilled both their bowls without asking and she let him. They became, without either of them quite deciding to, exactly what they both needed, not romantically, not with the weight of attachment that Rogue could not safely afford, but the way 2 people become friends when they've each recognized in the other the particular quality of someone who has had to invent themselves from scratch and has done a better job of it than anyone had the right to expect. Xavier told him about the wizarding world when Harry was 10, on a rainy October afternoon in the study, with the kind of premeditated care that Xavier brought to conversations that needed to be right rather than easy. He started with Lily. That was the right place to start, he had decided. Not with prophecies, not with dark lords, not with the weight of a destiny that other people had constructed around a child's grief. He started with a red-haired woman in Cokeworth who had discovered at age 11 that the world was larger than she'd been told, and who had spent her life with the particular courage of someone who understood exactly what they were and was not apologetic about it. Harry sat very still and listened. He had a way of listening that was absolute, not passive, not merely polite, but completely present, which Xavier had noticed from the first and which he thought was part of the other gift, the non-telepathic one. The sensitivity to weight and mass extending, perhaps, to the weight of words. He listened to the story of Hogwarts and the wizarding world with the same focused attention he'd given the Greek myths and the Norse myths at 5, not with the wide-eyed credulity of a child being told a fairy story, but with the systematic engagement of someone cross-referencing incoming information against their existing model. The moving things, he said, when Xavier paused. That's magic. It's a form of it, Xavier said carefully. It's yours. Your specific expression of it. But yes, the ability is inherited from your mother, and she from hers, going back through a lineage of people who access the world's energy in a particular way. Harry was quiet. Then, and my father? A wizard as well. James Potter. By all accounts extraordinary, talented, loyal, funny. Xavier let that sit for a moment. You have his hair, apparently. Harry touched his perpetually chaotic hair, which resisted all efforts at order with the cheerful stubbornness of something that had decided chaos was its natural state. That explains that, he said. There's more, Xavier said. And he told him about Voldemort. He told him about the night in Godric's Hollow. He didn't spare the details, because Harry was 10 and Harry had earned honesty, but he told it without drama, without the mythological weight that the wizarding world had draped over the event like a ceremonial cloth. He told it as plainly as possible: this happened, and this, and this. And you survived something that should not have been survivable, and no one completely understands why, and the scar on your forehead is the record of it. Harry listened to all of it. His face did not crumple. His eyes did not fill. He sat with his hands in his lap and his glasses slightly crooked, which happened when he was deep in thought, and he processed. When Xavier finished, Harry said, "Is he still alive?" Voldemort. Diminished. Disembodied. But the indication is yes, somewhere. Will he come back? The wizarding world believes he will. Eventually. Harry nodded slowly. And they think I'm supposed to stop him. There's a prophecy, yes. Neither can live while the other survives. Xavier watched Harry's face. I want to be clear with you about something. That prophecy was made about circumstances no one anticipated would change. You have not grown up as the boy it predicted. The question of what it means for you now is genuinely open. Harry looked at him. You're saying I can choose. I'm saying that whoever or whatever you are not simply the fulfillment of someone else's prediction. You are a person. Xavier's voice was level, clear, carrying the full weight of what he meant. You have the right to decide what you do with what you are. Harry was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the rain intensified against the windows and then eased, which was Storm in the garden doing something experimental with a low-pressure system. I want to see it, Harry said finally. The wizarding world. Hogwarts. I want to see it for myself. I expected you would. Not because of the prophecy. Because it's half of what I am and I don't know it yet. Harry's eyes were clear and direct. And I want to meet Dumbledore. Why? Xavier asked. Harry's expression was difficult to read, which was unusual. Usually Harry was legible to Xavier in the way that very honest people are legible, you could see exactly what they were thinking because they weren't trying to hide it. But this expression had a quality of careful, private thought that had been worked through over time. Because, Harry said slowly, when you told me about the prophecy. About the scar. About why I was left with the Dursleys, he paused. The decision to leave me there. Someone made that decision. Someone knew what I was living in and decided it served a purpose. He straightened slightly. I want to look at that person. Xavier considered this. The precision of it. The absence of theatrics in it. A 10-year-old boy saying I want to look at that person the way a doctor says I want to look at the X-ray, not with drama, not with rage, but with the specific, steady intent of someone who intends to understand a thing completely before they decide what to do about it. We'll go, Xavier said. When the time is right. How old? Harry said. Older than 10, Xavier said. Younger than 40, they said simultaneously. Harry's mouth curved. Not a smirk, a real smile, the kind that arrived in his eyes first. He reached over and picked up Captain. Captain says you're stalling again. Captain is a troublemaker, Xavier said. He learned it from me, Harry said. I learned it from Logan. That, Xavier said, I absolutely believe. He was 12 when the first owl arrived. It came through the Institute's east window on a Tuesday morning, dropped a letter in the middle of the breakfast table with the bearing of something accustomed to making an entrance, and sat on the toast rack looking expectant. Every person at the table stared at it. The owl stared back. Bobby Drake made ice appear on one fingertip involuntarily, which he did when startled. Harry reached across, took the letter, broke the wax seal, and read it. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He read it twice. Then he set it down on the table and looked at Xavier at the far end of the table and said, They found me. Eventually they would, Xavier said, with the calm of someone who had been waiting for exactly this. What do we do about it? Logan, from beside Xavier, poured himself more coffee. We write back, he said. We tell them you're busy. We do not tell them he's busy, Xavier said. We respond with appropriate courtesy and explain that Harry's education is being handled through alternative means. He looked at Harry. And we give ourselves 5 more years. Harry looked at the letter. At the owl. What if I want to go? Not yet, Xavier said. Not until you're ready. Define ready, Harry said. Xavier looked at his student, 12 years old, sharp-eyed, already 6 months past Logan on 3 of the 4 combat disciplines they'd been working through, already holding the mental architecture of someone who'd been trained by one of the world's most powerful telepaths, already bending gravity around him as naturally as breathing. Already, in every way that mattered, more prepared for almost anything than most adults Xavier had ever met. A little more time, Xavier said. 2 years. 3. Then we go on your terms, not theirs. Harry considered this. The owl on the toast rack made a sound of reproach. Harry offered it a piece of bacon. It ate the bacon with dignity. 3 years, Harry said. Then we go. On your terms, Xavier said. On my terms, Harry agreed. He was 15 when they sent the second owl. He was in the middle of a training session with Rogue and Logan when it arrived, and he read the letter while Logan pretended not to be watching and Rogue sat on the training mat with her arms folded. Mr. Potter. Your presence is formally requested, Rogue said, reading over his shoulder. That's polite speak for you've been ignoring us and we're losing patience. They've been patient for 3 years, Logan said. For a bunch of people who think they run a hidden country, that's actually impressive. Harry folded the letter. He was 15, and he was, there was no less dramatic way to say it, remarkable. Not in any obvious, showy way. He didn't have the quality of someone who knew they were remarkable, which was perhaps the most remarkable thing about him. He was tall now, finally, with the kind of build that came from 7 years of training with Logan, not heavy but entirely solid, the kind of solid that meant something. The glasses were still there, still slightly crooked, still the first thing people noticed before they realized there was something behind them that warranted more attention than the glasses. Dumbledore signed it this time, Harry said, looking at the letter. Before it was someone called McGonagall. That means he wants to talk to you himself, Xavier said, from the doorway. He'd been there for the last 30 seconds. He's been patient, as Logan says. But Dumbledore is also a man who does not like uncertainty, and you represent an enormous uncertainty to everything he has planned. Harry looked at the letter. At Xavier. You said on my terms. Yes. Then let's go, Harry said. I'm ready. Xavier looked at him, really looked at him, the way he'd been looking at Harry for 10 years now, reading not the surface but the structure beneath it. And what he found was what he'd found for the last few years, growing steadily clearer the way distant things become clear as you approach them, a person. A complete, grounded, genuine, unfrightened person. Not the boy who lived. Not the fulfillment of a prophecy. Not a weapon or a symbol or a playing piece. A person. Yes, Xavier said. You are. He made 3 phone calls that afternoon. 1 to Scott. 1 to Auror. 1 to Logan, who was still in the training room and already knew, because Logan always already knew. How many? Logan said on the phone. Just us, I think, Xavier said. To start. And when they don't like how it starts. Xavier looked out his study window at the grounds of the Institute, at the oak Harry had been climbing since he was 7, at the garden where storm-shaped clouds, at the gravel path where 2 sets of footprints, one large, one small, one large, one much less small, were pressed in the habit of 10 years of early morning runs. Then we remind them, Xavier said, that there are more of us. Chapter 3, the boy they were expecting Hogwarts materialized out of the Scottish morning like something that had decided to exist and committed to it completely, towers stacking improbably against a grey sky, the lake flat and dark below, the whole structure carrying the particular authority of a place that had been standing long enough to stop justifying itself to anyone. Harry looked at it from the road above Hogsmeade and said nothing for a moment. Logan stood beside him. Bigger than I expected. Everything about this country is bigger than expected, Rogue said, from Harry's other side, pulling her jacket tighter against the wind. She hadn't been invited, technically. She'd been in the car when they left the hotel in Edinburgh and nobody had told her to get out, so here she was. Scott had the car. Xavier was already at the main gate, having sent word ahead through channels that Harry Potter would be arriving at 9 a.m. and that Professor Dumbledore might wish to be present. Xavier's version of a calling card. Polite. Completely non-negotiable in what it implied. Harry picked up his bag, one bag, which Xavier had raised an eyebrow at and Harry had shrugged about, because he'd never owned enough things to require more than one bag, and started down the road. He wasn't nervous. That was the thing Logan noticed and filed away with the particular satisfaction of a teacher who has watched something take root over years and is now seeing it in flower. No nerves. Just the focused, settled attention Harry brought to everything he found genuinely interesting, and Hogwarts, clearly, was genuinely interesting. The gates opened before they reached them. Not mechanically, they swung inward with the slow deliberateness of something responding to intent rather than touch. A woman stood on the other side, tartan, upright, with the carriage of someone who had been told the same piece of information by too many people who were wrong and had stopped being polite about it. "Mr. Potter," said Professor McGonagall. Her eyes swept across him, taking inventory, and Harry watched her do it with the same openness he watched everything, not performing ease, just genuinely not threatened by scrutiny. "Professor McGonagall," Harry said. Xavier had given him the names. He'd retained them. Her eyes moved to Logan. To Rogue. To Xavier in his chair, settled beside the gate with the patience of a man who had been arriving at institutions that didn't want him for 30 years. Something shifted in her expression, the crisp authority bending very slightly towards something more complex. "Professor Xavier," she said. "Thank you for your correspondence." "Thank you for your hospitality," Xavier said warmly. "I hope this morning isn't an inconvenience." "Not at all," she said, in the tone of someone for whom it was very much something but who had decided that saying so was beneath her. She turned back to Harry. "The headmaster is expecting you. I'll take you up myself." "All of us?" Harry asked pleasantly. A pause. "Fractional." "All of you," she confirmed. The castle was extraordinary inside. Not in the sense of grandeur alone, though there was grandeur, certainly, the kind that came from stone that had absorbed 8 centuries of human energy and retained it in the walls. It was extraordinary in the sense that Harry could feel it. Not in the mind-reaching way, not telepathy, but in the other language, the gravity language, the one that lived in his chest. The castle had weight that wasn't entirely architectural. It was saturated with something deep and layered and old, and it pressed back against his awareness of it the way a hand presses back against a hand. He kept his face neutral, but his fingers flexed once at his side. Rogue, beside him, said quietly, "You feel that too?" "Yeah," Harry said. "It's like the building is alive." "Something like that," Harry said. They went up staircases that relocated mid-journey, which should have been alarming and was instead fascinating, and Harry watched the portraits on the walls with genuine interest. They watched back, murmuring to each other, and several of them pressed closer to their frames in a way that suggested agitation at his presence. One old wizard in a green robe pointed at Harry's forehead and said something to his neighbor with wide eyes. Harry made eye contact with him until the portrait looked away. McGonagall knocked twice on the gargoyle at the 7th floor, gave a password, and the stone staircase spiraled upward to the headmaster's office. The office itself was circular and layered with the accumulated density of a life spent acquiring things of significance. Instruments that moved. Portraits of former headmasters. Shelves stacked with objects that had the quality of things given rather than bought. And behind the desk, rising from his chair as they entered, Albus Dumbledore. Harry looked at him. He was what Xavier's description had prepared Harry to find, tall, white-haired, with a face that was kind in the default setting, the kind of default kindness that was so practiced it had become indistinguishable from the genuine article except in the eyes, which were watchful above the half-moon glasses in a way that the smile below them didn't quite account for. He was wearing robes in deep blue and there was a blackened quality to one of his hands that Harry noted and did not comment on. Harry, Dumbledore said, and there was warmth in the word, real warmth, which was the complicated thing about him that Harry had been prepared for but still needed a moment to navigate. The warmth was not false. It coexisted with everything else. Professor Dumbledore, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him the way Xavier had sometimes looked at Harry in the early years, with the particular attention of someone seeing something they'd theorized about and finding the theory insufficient. Harry was not what he'd expected. Harry could see this clearly, with or without telepathy, because Dumbledore's expectation was visible in the way his smile adjusted, recalibrating slightly, warmth genuine but calculations running simultaneously underneath it. "Please," Dumbledore said. "Sit. All of you." His eyes moved across the group with the practiced grace of a man who commanded rooms. "Professor Xavier. It's an honor to meet you in person. I've followed your work with great interest." "And I yours," Xavier said, settling his chair beside the desk. "Though I suspect we've approached some similar problems from very different directions." "All roads," Dumbledore said, gesturing graciously. He sat. "Harry. I've wanted this meeting for some time. I hope you'll forgive the delay, or rather, I hope you'll allow me to say that I understand it was your choice to delay, and I respect that." "Do you?" Harry asked. A small pause. The smile remained. "I do," Dumbledore said, and his tone suggested he was choosing to receive the question as straightforward rather than pointed, which was probably the intelligent choice. "You've been well, I hope. Professor Xavier's institution has clearly," his eyes traveled across Harry once more, "provided a remarkable education." "The best," Harry said. "I don't doubt it." Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk. His right hand, the blackened one, moved with a slight stiffness that spoke to damage that hadn't fully responded to whatever treatment he'd sought. Harry filed this away. "I'd like to speak frankly with you, Harry, if you'll permit it." "I'd prefer it," Harry said. "The wizarding world has waited a long time for your return." "There are matters. I haven't been gone," Harry said. "I've been in New York. I was available." The first real silence. McGonagall, standing near the bookcase, looked at Harry. Something in her expression shifted toward the attentive. Dumbledore's smile adjusted again, smaller now, more honest. "You're right," he said. "That was poorly phrased. What I mean to say is that there are circumstances in our world which your presence, your participation, may be essential to addressing." "The prophecy," Harry said. "Among other things." "Tell me the whole of it," Harry said. "Not the version that was left out of everything you sent through the owls. The full text." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood, moved to the cabinet behind him, and withdrew a small stone basin. He set it on the desk and touched it, and from the silvery surface the voice of a prophecy emerged, a woman's voice, tranced and strange, speaking words about power the Dark Lord knows not, about the one with the power to vanquish, about marking equals. Harry listened to all of it without interrupting. When it finished he was quiet for a moment. "Then, he marked me as his equal," Harry said. "That was the night at Godric's Hollow." "Yes. And power he knows not." Harry looked at Dumbledore. "Not confrontationally. Directly. He doesn't know about my mutation." "No," Dumbledore said. "The wizarding world is, not entirely unfamiliar with unusual gifts, but the kind of abilities you've developed through your other heritage are quite outside our experience." My other heritage, Harry said, with the slight emphasis of someone noting that this is not how he would have phrased it. Forgive me, Dumbledore said. And he meant it, which was what made him complicated. What you are is not two halves of something. I understand that. Logan, in the chair to Harry's left, had been silent this entire time with the practiced stillness of a man who knew when silence was the most useful thing he could offer. Now he shifted fractionally. Dumbledore's eyes moved to him with the unhurried calm of someone who was also, in his own way, very good at reading rooms. You raised him, Dumbledore said, to Logan. Helped, Logan said. He speaks well of you, Dumbledore said, slightly wrong-footed, Harry thought, by finding something other than resentment in Logan, which was perhaps what he'd expected. He speaks well of everyone he respects, Logan said. Short list. Dumbledore looked back at Harry. And here was the thing about Dumbledore that Harry had prepared himself for, had sat with Xavier and discussed over 3 years of knowing this meeting was coming. The man was not a villain. He was something more difficult. He was a man who had decided, long ago, that he could see further than other people, and that what he saw required sacrifices he was willing to make on behalf of people who hadn't been consulted. The Dursleys had been a sacrifice of that kind. Harry's childhood had been a sacrifice of that kind. Placed there not from cruelty but from the cold arithmetic of a very brilliant man who had decided the equation required it. Harry understood this. He had understood it since he was 12. It had taken him until 14 to stop being angry about it in the purely reactive way, and until 15 to transmute that anger into something more useful, which was the clear-eyed refusal to let the same arithmetic be applied to him again. I want to ask you something directly, Harry said. Please, Dumbledore said. When you left me at Privet Drive, Harry said. You knew what they were. You knew what the house was. Aunt Petunia herself said you'd written to her. You knew. The office was very quiet. One of the instruments on the shelf made a sound like a slow exhale. I knew it would not be comfortable, Dumbledore said, and the honesty in his voice was its own kind of devastating, because it wasn't denial. I knew your aunt and uncle were. I slept in a cupboard, Harry said. Flat. Not angry. Factual. Silence. I know, Dumbledore said. Very quietly. You knew that at the time. A longer pause. I should have checked more carefully than I did, Dumbledore said. I was confident that blood protection, and the knowledge that you would be safe, you decided my suffering was manageable, Harry said. In the service of keeping me humble, keeping me connected to the non-magical world, keeping me from being too confident or too comfortable before you needed me for the prophecy. He paused. I'm not telling you something you don't know. I'm telling you that I know it, so we can speak plainly. Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter for a long moment, and what crossed his face was something that did not have a comfortable name, not guilt exactly, not shame exactly, but something between them, the expression of a man who has been building a justification for 20 years and is now, in the presence of the person the justification was built around, finding the architecture insufficient. Yes, Dumbledore said. That was my thinking. It was wrong. Thank you, Harry said. I believe you. I also want you to know that it won't happen again. Dumbledore stopped. I'm not a piece on a board, Harry said. I understand the prophecy. I understand what Voldemort is and what he intends and what I may need to do about it. But I do it my way, with my people behind me, on a timeline I determine. Not yours. He paused. You can help. I'd like your help. But you don't move me. The room was very quiet. McGonagall made a sound. It might have been a cough. It had the quality of something being suppressed. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long, careful moment. And then something happened that Harry hadn't entirely predicted. The old wizard sat back in his chair, and the calculating quality behind his eyes softened into something more genuine, more tired, and perhaps more honest than the meeting had been up to that point. No, Dumbledore said. I don't suppose I do. He said it without performance. Without the gracious acceptance that was just another form of management. He said it like a man who had been moving people for a very long time and had just encountered someone who wouldn't move, and who, beneath the long-established habit of maneuvering, could recognize that this might be, in some fundamental way, better. "I would like to offer you a space here," Dumbledore said. "Not as a student, I understand that's not appropriate. But Hogwarts has resources. The library. The training spaces. Teachers who understand the wizarding side of your nature who may be able to offer things even Professor Xavier cannot." Harry looked at Xavier. Xavier gave the slight nod that meant your call. "I'd like to see the library," Harry said. They gave him a tour, and the tour became something else about 10 minutes in, because the castle itself couldn't seem to leave Harry alone. Peeves attempted 3 separate pranks in the first corridor, all of which stopped in mid-execution when Peeves got close enough to Harry to get a sense of him, and backed off with an expression that, on a poltergeist, could only be described as reconsidering. Portraits tracked him through rooms. Suits of armor creaked in a way that seemed like attention rather than age. And then, in the defense against the dark arts corridor, they ran into students. A Gryffindor prefect was leading a group of 4th years back from lunch, and the column of teenagers stopped when they rounded the corner and found Harry and his group coming the other way. 14-14-year-olds stood and stared. Harry stood and looked back. McGonagall was already opening her mouth. One of the students near the back said, in an audible whisper, "That's him. That's Harry Potter." And just like that, the corridor had an energy. Harry had been prepared for this intellectually. He had not fully reckoned with the visceral experience of being the subject of this much directed, immediate, emotionally loaded attention from people he had never met. The telepathic layer was significant, 15 minds, all carrying versions of the same story, the same image, the same expectation, all of it suddenly directed at him in a concentrated wave. He felt it, sorted it, and put it aside with the efficiency of 10 years of Xavier's training. His expression didn't change. "Hi," he said, to the corridor at large. Chaos, well-behaved chaos, institutional chaos, the chaos of a group of teenagers who all want to say something and are trying to determine whether they're allowed to. A girl near the front, brown-haired, with the particular energy of someone who approached new information the way Harry approached new information, immediately and directly, said, "Are you really Harry Potter?" "Yes," Harry said. "Where have you been?" She said, and it came out with a frankness that was clearly characteristic, slightly surprising even to her, and absolutely unretracted. "You should have been at Hogwarts for 4 years. Everyone has been, Hermione," the prefect said. "No, it's a fair question," Harry said. He looked at the girl, Hermione, apparently, who was looking back at him with an expression that said she had opinions and was deciding whether their meeting had been long enough to justify expressing them. "I've been in New York. At another school. For mutants," Hermione said. Several people in the corridor made sounds. Harry raised an eyebrow. "I've read about it," Hermione said, with the total lack of defensiveness of someone who found reading about things to be entirely sensible preparation for all situations. "Professor Xavier's Institute. You're a mutant as well as a wizard." "Yes," Harry said. "That's extraordinary," Hermione said. The intersection of 2 distinct frameworks for accessing, she stopped herself, visibly. "Sorry. I have questions." "I can tell," Harry said. There was something in his expression, a flicker of the genuine warmth that Logan had recognized in the cupboard when he was 5, the quality of someone who liked people who were direct because directness was a form of respect. "Ask them. Now," Hermione said, slightly thrown by the permission. "Unless there's somewhere you need to be." McGonagall looked at the ceiling briefly. Then she stepped aside, because whatever this was, it was probably better to let it happen than to stop it. Hermione Granger asked 6 questions in 4 minutes. Harry answered all of them. By the end the corridor had become an informal gathering, the prefect had given up on moving anyone anywhere, and a red-haired boy near the back was watching the whole exchange with an expression caught between fascination and the suspicion that he was witnessing something significant. "I'm Ron Weasley," the red-haired boy said, when Hermione paused for breath. He said it with the particular ease of someone who had decided confidence was less exhausting than uncertainty. "You might have heard of my brothers. Or my family generally." "We're Weasleys," Harry said. The professor mentioned. "Your family has been vocal about wanting the Ministry to investigate conditions for non-human magical beings." Ron blinked. Clearly not what he'd expected. "Yeah," he said. "Dad, mostly. He's enthusiastic." "I'd like to meet him," Harry said. Ron's face split into a grin that was entirely unguarded and entirely genuine. "Yeah. He'd absolutely lose his mind." This was the beginning of several things. Harry understood this in the moment, in the way he understood most things, not with drama, but with the clarity of someone whose perceptions were very good and who had learned to trust them. The Ministry owl arrived before they'd finished the library. McGonagall brought it to Harry herself, her expression doing something careful and controlled. The letter was on heavy parchment with the Ministry seal pressed into scarlet wax, and it was addressed to Harry in the official font of official communication being used by people who considered their communications official. Harry opened it. "Mr. Potter. The Ministry of Magic hereby informs you that you are required to present yourself at the Ministry offices, Level 2, for a formal interview regarding your status under Wizarding law, your extended absence from the Wizarding community, and your associations with individuals whose legal standing under said law is unclear. Please consider this correspondence an official summons. Failure to respond within 48 hours will result in further measures. Yours, Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister." Harry read it twice. Then he handed it to Xavier, who read it, and handed it to Logan, who read the first 3 lines and handed it back. "They're calling you a flight risk," Rogue said, reading over Xavier's shoulder. "Your associations. That means us." "Yes," Xavier said. "Legal standing unclear," Logan said. "Meaning they haven't decided yet whether mutants fall under their jurisdiction." "They're going to decide they do," Harry said. "That's what this is. They want me in a room where they control the frame." He folded the letter along its original crease. 48 hours. "Do you want to respond?" Xavier asked. Harry looked at the letter. Then at Xavier. Then, briefly, at the library around them, shelves 10 meters high, information stacked in a city of knowledge, and the particular quality of a room that had been accumulating wisdom for centuries and wasn't done yet. "I want 2 days in this library first," Harry said. "Then we respond." McGonagall had been listening from the door. She said, carefully, "I can make that happen." Harry looked at her. She had the expression of someone who was recalibrating something fundamental. He'd watched it happen across the morning, the beginning of the tour, and McGonagall had been precise, correct, carrying the institutional weight of someone who had been asked to facilitate a meeting she had reservations about. And then somewhere across the corridor with Hermione and Ron and the gradually expanding gathering of students, something in her assessment had shifted, and now she was looking at Harry the way she looked at her best students, not with warmth exactly, but with the particular respect of a teacher confronting someone who doesn't need to be taught so much as pointed in a direction and given space. "Thank you," Harry said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Madam Pants will have opinions about a non-student in the restricted section." "I'll be respectful," Harry said. "It's not your respect I'm worried about," McGonagall said. "It's hers. She regards all readers as potential threats to the collection." She paused. "You'll manage, I expect." The 2 days were interesting. Hermione, who had received and granted herself permission to help Harry navigate the library because nobody had specifically told her not to, proved to be exactly what she appeared, a person of enormous intellectual resources, complete organizational precision, and zero tolerance for any information that was vague when it could be specific. She was also, Harry found, unexpectedly funny, in the dry, self-aware way of someone who had noticed that most people didn't share her reference points and had made peace with this while retaining the right to find it slightly absurd. Ron appeared at lunch both days with sandwiches, thick, slightly chaotic sandwiches that were clearly made with the generous and precision of someone who considered portions to be suggestions, and sat at the library table eating and listening and occasionally contributing observations that were less informed than Hermione's and more practically astute, which Harry recognized was a form of intelligence that got undervalued. Logan spent both days doing a perimeter walk of the castle grounds, which was his version of making himself useful in an unfamiliar environment. Rogue found the room of requirement on accident on the second morning, which said something about her, and spent 2 hours in it before she figured out what had happened, and came back to the library looking thoughtful and slightly unsettled in the particular way of someone who has been given exactly what they needed and is suspicious of it. Xavier had tea with Dumbledore both afternoons, and neither of them said afterward exactly what had been discussed, though Logan reported, based on zero information and total intuition, that it had been the most polite argument in the history of polite arguments. Harry spent the library days doing what he'd said he would, reading. Specifically reading 3 centuries of ministry records, the formal structure of Auror authority and its legal basis, the history of wizarding contact with non-magical humans, and 3 different accounts of the last wizarding war that contradicted each other on enough points to tell him more by their contradictions than by their content. On the second evening, in the library after Hermione and Ron had gone to dinner, Harry sat back in his chair and looked at the notes he'd made, organized, precise, covering 2 inches of parchment in the kind of handwriting Xavier had instilled in all his students on the grounds that clarity of expression on paper reflected clarity of thought. Rogue dropped into the chair across from him. "What are you thinking?" "That the ministry is going to send more than a summons," Harry said. "Aurors?" "Eventually." He looked at his notes. "The legal framework is interesting. Their jurisdiction over magical beings and persons is genuinely comprehensive within Britain. If they decide to claim that my mutation falls under their definition of magical ability, which the Umbridge letter suggests they're preparing to do, they'll argue they own you," Rogue said. "They'll argue they have authority over me," Harry said. "Which is a more sophisticated version of the same thing." "And when they send Aurors?" Harry looked at her. His expression was thoughtful, absent the performance of anything. "Just genuinely thinking. Then we make it very clear," he said, "that there are categories of response that their legal framework hasn't accounted for." "You mean us," Rogue said. "I mean the X-Men," Harry said. "I mean Logan and Storm and Scott and you and Xavier, and the fact that the Ministry of Magic has never dealt with any of us before and has no idea what it's dealing with." He looked out the library window at the lake. "I'm not interested in a confrontation. I'm interested in a demonstration." "What's the difference?" "A confrontation is about winning," Harry said. "A demonstration is about information. I want them to understand what they're attempting, so they can make an informed choice about whether to keep attempting it." Rogue looked at him across the table. "You're 15, she said. "Yes," Harry said. "Most 15-year-olds I've met are angry about their hair," she said. "I've had a different upbringing," Harry said. She smiled at him, a full one, the kind she didn't give many people. "Yeah, you have." She leaned back. "They're going to come, Harry. They don't like things they can't control." "I know," he said. "You're not bothered by it." He thought about this honestly, the way he thought about everything. "No," he said. "I'm ready." He paused. "Are you?" She looked at her gloved hands on the table. At the space between herself and everything breakable. "Yeah," she said. "I think I am." The letter to the ministry went out the following morning. Harry wrote it himself, in his precise, Xavier-trained handwriting, on plain white paper rather than ministry parchment because he didn't have ministry parchment and didn't feel the need to acquire any. "Dear Madam Umbridge. Thank you for your correspondence. I am happy to discuss matters of mutual concern at a time and location of my choosing. I am currently at Hogwarts and will remain accessible here for the next week. If the ministry wishes to send representatives for a conversation, they are welcome to do so. I am not available for formal summons, as I do not recognize the ministry's jurisdiction over my person or my associations. I look forward to a productive dialogue. Regards, Harry Potter. He addressed it correctly, sealed it, gave it to the owl that had arrived that morning with Ron's mother's concern about whether Harry was eating properly, and sent it back. Logan, reading over his shoulder, made the sound that was adjacent to a laugh. Think they'll take it well? Harry asked. Not even a little bit, Logan said. Good, Harry said. I want to know what they do when they're not happy. Tells you more about people. He went down to breakfast. Rogue and Scott were already there. Xavier was having coffee with Dumbledore, who had arrived from his tower and was looking at Harry's departing figure with an expression that was equal parts admiration and the quiet alarm of a man who has spent 20 years preparing a careful plan and has just watched the plan stand up and start making its own arrangements. McGonagall set a teacup down beside Xavier and said, quietly, "He's remarkable." "Yes," Xavier said. "He's going to be trouble," she said. "For the ministry." "Undoubtedly," Xavier said. "I find," McGonagall said, after a pause, "that I'm not particularly upset about that." Xavier smiled, the real one, the slightly rueful one. "Neither am I," he said. Outside, across the grounds, Harry Potter was walking toward the lake with a one-armed toy soldier in his jacket pocket and the specific, grounded confidence of someone who knew exactly who they were and was not going to apologize for any of it. The owl carrying his letter to the ministry was already a speck against the morning sky. Somewhere in the ministry offices, a pink-clad woman was going to open that letter in approximately 2 hours, and the things that happened after that were going to be, in the ministry's entire considerable history, quite unprecedented. Harry Potter stood at the lake's edge and looked at the reflection of Hogwarts in the still, dark water, his mother's world, his inheritance, looking back at him, and for the first time since Xavier had told him about it at 10 years old, it felt like his. Not because a prophecy said so. Not because a world had decided to put his name on it. Because he was standing in it, unafraid and entirely himself, and that was enough. The water was very still. The morning was very clear. Somewhere behind him, 100 meters up, in the headmaster's office, Fawkes the Phoenix sang a single, clear note. Harry heard it and didn't look back. Chapter 4, What They Sent and What They Found. The Aurors came on a Thursday. There were 12 of them, which was either a serious tactical deployment or a statement, and given that the ministry had sent them to Hogwarts rather than an open field somewhere, Harry suspected it was intended as both. They arrived through the main gate at 7 in the morning, uniformed in the deep red robes of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, wands visible at their hips, moving with the practiced formation of people who had done this before and considered themselves good at it. Harry was already up. He'd been up since 5:30, running the grounds with Logan the way he'd run every morning for 9 years, and he'd seen them come through the gate from the top of the hill above the lake, 12 red figures moving in 2 columns with the particular purposeful stride of people who had been told they had authority and believed it. He and Logan stood at the top of the hill and watched them come. 12, Logan said. I see them. That's a lot for one person. They're not sure what I am, Harry said. So they sent enough for several possibilities. Logan looked at him sideways. You're not going down there alone. I wasn't planning to. Harry reached into his jacket pocket and his fingers found Captain out of habit, the small weight of the one-armed soldier, familiar as a heartbeat. He didn't take him out. Just touched him once, then let go. Wake the others. Tell Xavier not to come down until I've had the first conversation. He's not going to love that. He'll understand it. Harry started down the hill. I need them to speak to me first. Without the professor there, they'll underestimate me, and I want to know exactly how they're framing this before we respond. Logan stood at the top of the hill for a moment, watching Harry walk down through the morning mist with his hands in his jacket pockets and his shoulders completely level, and then he turned and went back toward the castle at a pace that was technically not running but covered ground quickly. Harry reached the main entrance courtyard at the same time as the Aurors, which was timing he'd calculated on the way down. He came around the corner of the stone archway and stopped in the middle of the courtyard, and the 12 red-robed figures stopped in their formation, and for a moment everyone simply looked at everyone else. The lead Auror was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a jaw like a brick and the expression of someone who had never found a situation he couldn't reduce to its simplest version. His name, Harry would learn, was Williamson, and he was one of the Ministry's more senior field operatives, which meant someone had taken this seriously enough to send competent people rather than just numerous ones. Williamson looked at Harry. Harry looked back. The morning mist was doing something atmospheric between them that neither of them acknowledged. "Harry Potter," Williamson said. It wasn't quite a question and wasn't quite a statement, it had the quality of a form being filled out. "Yes," Harry said. "John Williamson, Department of Magical Law Enforcement. You received our summons." "I received a letter," Harry said. "I sent a reply." "Your reply was noted," Williamson said, with the careful neutrality of someone who had been briefed that the reply had caused considerable upset at the Ministry and had been instructed to project none of that upset. "I've been sent to formally request that you accompany us to the Ministry for the interview as originally requested." "Requested," Harry said. "Not ordered." A fractional pause. "Requested," Williamson confirmed. "That's interesting," Harry said. The letter used the word summons. And the word consequences. That's not request language. Williamson's jaw did something. "Mr. Potter. I think we both prefer to resolve this quickly and professionally." "I agree completely," Harry said. "So let me be direct, which is something I prefer. I'm not going to the Ministry. I told you this in my reply. I'm happy to speak with Ministry representatives here, in this courtyard, right now, for as long as is useful. What I'm not going to do is present myself to an institution that has already made clear it intends to claim jurisdiction over me and my associates without any legal basis I recognize, on a timeline I had no part in determining, for an interview on terms I haven't agreed to." He said all of this with the particular quality of someone not interested in escalation but equally uninterested in pretending the terms of a situation were different from what they actually were. Williamson looked at him. Looked at the 12 Aurors flanking him. Looked back at Harry, who was one person, alone in a courtyard, 17 years old, weight, 15, the briefing had said 15, standing with his hands in his jacket pockets as though 12 wands within reach of their owners was a Wednesday. "Are you refusing to comply?" Williamson asked. "I'm declining an unreasonable request," Harry said. "Those are different things." Williamson reached a decision. Harry could see it happen, not telepathically, though he could have, but visibly, in the quality of the man's posture shifting from attempting diplomacy to executing contingency plan. 12 hands moved toward 12 wand hilts with the synchronized smoothness of a drill performed many times. "Mr. Potter," Williamson said, and the diplomatic register had been set down, "you're coming with us." "No," Harry said. "I'm not." And then several things happened very quickly. The 12 Aurors drew their wands. Harry's hands came out of his pockets. And the gravity in the courtyard changed. It was subtle at first, or rather, the subtlety was the point. Harry didn't throw them across the yard, didn't shout, didn't perform any of the dramatic escalations that the situation might have accommodated. What he did was find the gravitational relationship between 12 people and the ground they were standing on, and he adjusted it, gently, the way you'd tighten a thread rather than cut it. Every Auror's feet settled into the stone of the courtyard with a weight that wasn't quite painful and wasn't quite possible, as though gravity had decided, specifically and personally, that these 12 people in particular needed to stay exactly where they were. The wands were up, but nobody was moving. "What?" one of the Aurors in the back rank said. He was trying to lift his foot. The foot declined. Williamson's jaw was doing considerable work. "What is this?" "Physics," Harry said pleasantly. "Specifically, a localized gravitational adjustment. Your mass relative to the ground is currently about 3 times what it should be. You can still breathe. You can still speak. You can move your arms. You can't go anywhere. Release this immediately, Williamson said, with the full authority of a man who was used to authority working. In a moment, Harry said. First, I want to finish what I was saying, because I think it's important that we understand each other before this goes further. He waited. Nobody was going anywhere. The ministry has a decision to make. It can choose to work with me, on reasonable terms, toward a common goal, which is dealing with Voldemort before he finishes what he started in 1981. Or it can choose to send increasingly large groups of people to try to compel me to do things I've already declined to do. I'm telling you now, as clearly as I can, that the second option won't work and will get embarrassing before it gets better. He released them. It was abrupt. One moment they were rooted, the next they weren't, and several of the Auror stumbled because their bodies had been braced against a weight that was suddenly gone. Williamson caught himself on the courtyard wall. His face was the particular color of a person who is furious and is managing it with professional difficulty. That's assault on ministry officials, one of the Auror said, from the back. Young voice. Someone running the legal framework in real time. Nobody was hurt, Harry said. Nobody was threatened. You drew wands first. He looked at Williamson. Tell the minister I'm here. Tell him I'm willing to talk. Tell him the next group he sends should come to talk rather than to retrieve. He turned and walked back toward the castle. He half expected a spell from behind. He was ready for it, in the way that Logan had trained him to be ready for things that came from directions you weren't looking, the awareness distributed, the response time calibrated. But nothing came. Williamson, whatever else he was not stupid enough to hex a 15-year-old in the courtyard of Hogwarts on a clear morning with no legal justification he could defend. Harry went through the castle door and found Logan, Scott, Storm, and Rogue all standing in the entrance hall. Well? Rogue said. They'll be back, Harry said. Different instructions next time. How many next time? Scott asked. Harry thought about Williamson's face when the gravity adjusted. The particular color of someone recalculating everything they thought they'd known about the situation. More, he said. Definitely more. Xavier was in the entrance hall as well, and he gave Harry a look that was not quite a reprimand and not quite approval and was very much the specific look of a man who has trained someone very well and is experiencing the complicated feeling of watching that training in action in a situation he would have preferred to manage differently. You went down alone, Xavier said. I needed to hear what they said without the conversation being about what you represent, Harry said. The moment you're in the frame, Charles, it becomes a mutant rights question. And that's real, and it matters, but right now the specific question is about me and my legal status and I wanted it to stay that way. Xavier held his gaze for a moment. Then, you're not wrong. I know, Harry said, without smugness. Factually. 12 Aurors, Logan said to Xavier. He pinned all of them to the ground and gave a speech. It wasn't a speech, Harry said. It had a thesis and supporting arguments, Rogue said. That's a speech. They'll send more, Scott said. He had the practical focus that made him useful in these conversations. Scott didn't editorialize, he planned. Williamson goes back, reports, and whoever made the call to send 12 decides whether to double it or change strategy. They'll change strategy first, Harry said. They're not stupid. They'll try political pressure before they try force again. They'll go to Dumbledore. Dumbledore won't give them what they want, Xavier said. Not a guess, a reading, the product of 4 days of tea and careful conversation. He wants you here, Harry. Not because of the ministry. Despite it. I know, Harry said. Which is useful. He looked out the entrance hall window toward the courtyard, which was empty now, the 12 Aurors gone back through the gate. They'll try one more diplomatic approach. When that doesn't work, they'll escalate force. And that's when we need to be somewhere they choose to come to us. Where? Storm asked. Harry had been thinking about this since the library, since the 2 days reading ministry documents, since the clear morning at the lake when he'd understood what the next week was going to look like. The London safe house, he said, to Xavier. The one in Bloomsbury. Xavier was quiet. The Bloomsbury safe house was a property the Institute maintained for exactly the kind of operation that required a permanent presence in a city, well fortified in the practical and the discreet sense, large enough to accommodate several people, worded in ways that the ministry would find interesting to test. You want to give them a target, Xavier said. I want to give them a location that we control completely, Harry said. At Hogwarts we're guests. The ministry can argue, and they will, that Hogwarts is under wizarding jurisdiction and that gives them grounds. On our ground, in our building, the frame is entirely different. He looked at the group, Logan, who was nodding with the expression of a man who has had this exact conversation about a different building in a different country and knows how it goes, Scott, already running logistics behind his visor, Storm, composed and still in the way that preceded her being very much the opposite, Rogue, arms folded, watching Harry with the specific look she'd developed over 6 years of knowing him, the look that meant she was deciding whether this was brilliant or insane and had concluded, again, that with Harry those were rarely exclusive categories. Before we go, Harry said, I want to say goodbye to a few people. Hermione Granger was in the library, because Hermione Granger was always in the library, and she looked up when Harry appeared in the doorway and immediately read his face with the same speed she read everything else. You're leaving, she said. For now, Harry said. He dropped into the chair across from her. I'll be back. There's a situation developing with the ministry. The Aurors this morning, she said. Everyone saw them arrive. Are you all right? Perfectly, Harry said. They didn't touch me. She looked at him with the expression she got when she was deciding how to say something direct without it coming out badly, which was a look he'd come to recognize in 4 days as characteristic and endearing. You sent 12 Aurors away, she said. By yourself. They couldn't go anywhere, Harry said. It wasn't dramatic. Harry, she said. 12 trained ministry Aurors came to collect you and you sent them away alone. That is objectively dramatic. She paused. What happens next? They send more, he said. And we demonstrate that more doesn't help. She was quiet for a moment, turning a quill over in her fingers in the habitual way she had when she was working through something. The ministry is going to paint you as dangerous, she said. That's what they do when they can't control something. They did it too, she stopped. There are historical precedents. People who threaten their authority. The prophet will say things. I know, Harry said. Knowing isn't the same as being prepared for it. I've been called worse than whatever the prophet will come up with, Harry said. By a man who made me sleep in a cupboard. I think I'll manage. She flinched slightly, not at the information, but at the ease with which he delivered it, the absolute absence of self-pity. She had 3 follow-up questions about the cupboard that she managed, with effort, not to ask. Come back, she said. I will, he said. Keep reading. Find anything interesting about the Department of Mysteries. Her eyes sharpened immediately. Why the Department of Mysteries? Because the prophecy lives there, Harry said. And because anything the ministry keeps in a place called the Department of Mysteries is something I'd like to know more about before it becomes relevant. She already had a book half off the shelf before he'd finished the sentence. Ron was in the corridor outside, which was not a coincidence. He held out a package wrapped in a napkin. Mum's shortbread, he said. She owed it this morning and I was just going to eat it myself but... He shrugged with the studied casualness of someone performing unconcern about something they actually care about. Harry took the shortbread. Tell her thank you. She's going to want to meet you, Ron said. Properly. Not through owls. He paused. She's been following the Auror situation since Williamson left. She heard through Dad. He works at the ministry and Ron stopped himself. He doesn't agree with this, he said, more carefully. With sending Aurors. He thinks it's wrong. He's right, Harry said. Yeah, well. Ron's ears were doing the reddening thing they did when he was saying something that mattered to him more than he wanted to show. We're Gryffindors. We generally think sending 12 blokes to intimidate one person is poor form regardless of what the person can do. He stuck his hands in his robe pockets. You'll sort it? Yes, Harry said. Right then, Ron said. Shortbread travels well, just so you know. Harry smiled, the I-first kind. Good to know, he said. The Bloomsbury house was a Georgian terrace on a quiet street that looked from the outside like the other Georgian terraces on the quiet street, and differed from them internally in several significant respects including but not limited to, a basement training space that had taken Scott 3 weeks to design and Logan 2 weeks to fortify, a communications array that Jean had spent a summer installing, windows that were considerably more structurally resilient than they appeared, and a set of wards that Xavier had collaborated with a retired professor of runic theory to develop, which covered approaches that were both physical and magical in nature. They arrived on a Friday evening. Harry spent Saturday learning the building, all of it, room by room, which was how he'd approached every new space since he was 5 and had made the Xavier Institute a known quantity in his first 10 days. He stood in the basement and felt the wards, pressing against them the way you'd press against a wall to check for load-bearing capacity. He went to the roof and sat in the cold London air and looked at the city, which was bright and grey and complicated the way cities always are, and he thought about the ministry, for kilometers to the south, and the decision being made there right now about what to do next. Storm found him on the roof. She didn't say anything immediately. She sat beside him and looked at the city with the expression she had when she was listening to the weather, not the visible weather but the deep weather, the pressure and temperature and the dialogue between systems that most people experienced only as consequence. I can feel something building, she said, eventually. Politically, Harry said. In the sky, she said. But yes. Both. She looked at him sideways, Aurora Monroe, who had known Harry since he was 7 years old, who had let him watch her shape clouds every morning for a week, who had answered 6 questions about atmospheric pressure with complete seriousness because a child's curiosity deserved complete seriousness. Are you afraid? She asked. No, Harry said. Then, more honestly, I'm paying close attention. Which feels like fear sometimes but isn't. What's the difference? He thought about it the way he thought about everything, genuinely, without rushing to an answer. Fear is about the bad thing happening, he said. Attention is about making sure you see clearly when it does. Storm was quiet for a moment. Then, Logan taught you that. Logan demonstrated it, Harry said. He didn't teach it. He just showed me what it looked like in a person. She looked back at the city. When they come, she said, they'll send people who believe they're in the right. That's what makes it complicated. I know, Harry said. Most of them will be following orders, she said. People with lives. Some of them will have children. I know that too, Harry said. We're not going to hurt anyone. No, she said. But we're going to frighten people. And frightening people who believe in what they're doing creates resentment, Harry said. I know. That's why the how matters more than the what. He looked out at the city. I want them to leave understanding that the choice they made didn't work. Not because we destroyed them. Because we made it so clear that we could have, and didn't, that the equation changes. Storm looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved her hair. The city hummed below them. Your mother would have liked you, she said. Harry didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was even. Xavier told me she was like that. Thought through things. She was brave, Storm said. Not recklessly. Deliberately. Yeah, Harry said. I think that's the only kind worth being. The owl arrived Sunday morning. Not a ministry owl, this one was a private bird, small and efficient, carrying a note in handwriting Harry recognized from one of the documents he'd read in Hogwarts library. Alastair Moody. Retired. One of the Auror's most distinguished former members, with a record that spanned 30 years and an artificial eye that tracked things in ways human eyes didn't. The note said, "They're coming Tuesday. 32. Scrimgeour leading personally. He's good. Don't underestimate him. I'd tell you to run but you look like the kind that doesn't, so, the second rank will carry portkey anchors. Deal with those first." Harry read it twice. Then he went downstairs and gathered everyone in the kitchen. "Tuesday," he said. 32. Rufus Scrimgeour leading. Logan poured coffee. Set a mug down for Harry, who had started drinking coffee at 13 because Logan drank coffee and proximity was the most honest form of influence. "How do you know?" "Alastair Moody told me," Harry said. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. "Mad-Eye Moody," Scott said. "The Auror." "Former," Harry said. "He warned us." He set the note on the table. "Second rank will carry portkey anchors. That means if the first approach doesn't work, they're planning to forcibly relocate anyone they get hands on. So the first approach is a distraction," Rogue said. "Yes," Harry said. "Scrimgeour is smart. He's not sending 32 people because he thinks he needs 32 people. He's sending 32 people because the first group reports a gravity manipulation ability, so he's planning for it. He'll come in multiple vectors, try to divide the response." "He's going to be disappointed," Logan said. "He's going to be educational," Harry said. "There's a difference. I want everyone clear on something before Tuesday." He looked around the table, Logan, Scott, Storm, Rogue, Xavier at the table's head. 5 people who between them had fought things that made 32 Aurors look like a thought experiment. Nobody gets seriously hurt. On either side. We demonstrate capability, we remove their ability to execute the plan, and we give them a clear exit. That's the goal. "And if they don't take the exit?" Scott asked. Harry looked at him. "They'll take it," he said. "They're not fanatics. They're law enforcement officers who've been told they have the law on their side. Once we make it obvious that the law is not going to help them in this building, on this morning, they'll take the exit." "You're betting a lot on people being rational," Rogue said. "I'm betting on Scrimgeour being rational," Harry said. "Moody wouldn't have warned us about a man he thought was going to be stupid about this." Xavier, who had not spoken yet, said, "There's another consideration." Everyone looked at him. "When this is over," Xavier said, "the ministry will have a decision to make. They can escalate further, which becomes genuinely problematic, for them, because at some point the scale of force required to compel what they want becomes impossible to keep quiet, and quiet is what they have instead of public accountability. Or they can come to the table." He looked at Harry. "What we do Tuesday determines which way they go." "I know," Harry said. "I want to be in the building," Xavier said. "You will be," Harry said. "I want you where Scrimgeour can see you. I want him to understand what the full picture is." Xavier nodded slowly. "All right," he said. Then, with the slight curve of the Xavier smile, "I trust your judgment." It was not a small thing. Harry knew it was not a small thing, and Xavier knew that Harry knew, and neither of them said so. Tuesday came in cold and bright, the kind of October morning London does occasionally to remind everyone that it's capable of it. Harry was up at 5, ran the nearby park's perimeter twice, came back and ate breakfast alone in the kitchen with Captain standing on the table in his station while Harry went through the plan once more in the quiet of the early house. At 8:15, Storm came downstairs and looked out the kitchen window and said, very calmly, "They're in the street." They had come without warning, or they had thought they were coming without warning, which was a distinction that mattered. Apparition, a dozen of them at once, the sharp crack of displaced air that Harry felt through the building's wards like a hand on glass. Then more, at the back. Then more at either side. Harry stood up. Picked up Captain. Put him in his jacket pocket. Ready, he said to the kitchen. Logan cracked his knuckles. Storm's eyes had gone white at the edges, barely, the way they did when she was warming up. Scott's hand moved once to the side of his visor and back. Rogue pulled her gloves tight. Xavier set down his coffee mug. Ready, Rogue said, for all of them. The knock on the door was crisp and official. Harry opened it. Rufus Scrimgeour was not what the Ministry's public image suggested. The public image was political, the carefully managed presentation of institutional confidence, the lion's mane of tawny hair, the authoritative bearing. In person he was sharper than that, and the sharpness was the thing that mattered. The yellow eyes behind the spectacles moved across Harry with the quick, comprehensive assessment of someone who had survived 30 years of genuine danger through the quality of his attention, and what they found clearly required a moment of recalibration. Because Harry opened the door looking like himself. Jacket, dark jeans, the crooked glasses, the dark hair, the scar half visible under the fringe. He didn't square up. He didn't project. He just stood there, and the total absence of defensiveness in his posture was somehow more authoritative than a defensive posture would have been. Mr. Potter, Scrimgeour said. Mr. Scrimgeour, Harry said. Would you like to come in? Behind Scrimgeour, the street had 31 more Aurors and the weight of the Ministry's full institutional confidence. The building behind Harry had 5 people, one of whom was in a wheelchair, one of whom could fly, one of whom had metal bones, one of whom could not be touched, one of whom could turn off gravity. I'm here in my official capacity, Scrimgeour said, as head of the Auror office, under authorization from Minister Fudge, to Mr. Scrimgeour, Harry said. It's cold. Please come in. Scrimgeour stopped. Looked at him. The yellow eyes went through several calculations. He came in. 3 of his people behind him. The rest stayed in the street, which was the arrangement Harry had expected. Scrimgeour wasn't going to put his full force in an enclosed space before he understood the enclosed space. Xavier was in the sitting room. Storm stood near the window. Logan leaned against the far wall with his arms folded, and the particular expression he had when he was deciding to let a situation develop for a moment longer before being done with it. Scrimgeour saw Xavier and something moved in his face. Not fear. Reassessment. Xavier in person had a quality that photographs and reports didn't transmit, the quality of someone who was paying total, undivided attention to you, which in a man with Xavier's abilities had a specific weight. Professor Xavier, Scrimgeour said. Mr. Scrimgeour, Xavier said warmly. Please sit. They sat. The 3 accompanying Aurors stood. Harry sat across from Scrimgeour with his elbows on his knees, entirely at ease. I'm going to be direct with you, Scrimgeour said. I'd be grateful, Harry said. The Ministry needs you. Not wants, needs. Voldemort's forces have been active on the continent. There have been 3 incidents in the last month that we've managed to suppress from public knowledge, but which tell us clearly that he's more organized than we'd admitted. The prophecy, I know the prophecy, Harry said. Then you know why you matter to this situation. I know why I matter to the situation, Harry said. I'm questioning whether the Ministry matters to my approach to it. Scrimgeour's jaw tightened. You'd operate independently. I am operating independently, Harry said. I'm doing it right now. I've been doing it since I was 15 years old. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not against cooperation, Mr. Scrimgeour. I'm against being compelled. There's a version of this where the Ministry and I work toward the same goal. I'd prefer that version. But you've sent 35 people to 2 separate locations in the last week trying to physically remove me from where I chose to be, and I'd like that to stop before we discuss what cooperation looks like. Scrimgeour looked at him for a long moment. The yellow eyes were doing real work, reading, weighing, finding the quality of the person across from him and comparing it to the briefing documents and finding the briefing documents insufficient. The 32 outside, he said. I know they're there, Harry said. If this conversation goes badly, Xavier said, I have a mandate to use them. I know that too, Harry said. I want you to understand something clearly, Mr. Xavier, so that we can make an informed decision together about whether to use them. He paused. This building, and everyone in it, is entirely beyond the ability of 32 Aurors to compel. I don't say that to be threatening. I say it because I think you're intelligent enough to have already concluded it, and I'd rather we acknowledge it plainly and move on to the conversation worth having. Xavier was quiet. Outside, without fanfare, storm raised the temperature in the street by 12 degrees and shifted a cloud formation so that the morning light coming through the front windows of the building changed from cold and gray to clear gold. It was not remotely coincidental. One of the three accompanying Aurors looked at the window. Then at Storm. Then back at the window. What are we negotiating? Xavier asked. Harry looked at Xavier. Xavier gave nothing, waited. This was Harry's table. Autonomy, Harry said. Complete autonomy. I operate as I choose to operate, with the people I choose, on a timeline that makes sense. When Voldemort moves, I'll move. When the Ministry needs information, I'll provide what I'm able to. When there's a genuine emergency that requires coordination, I'll coordinate. He paused. What I won't do is register with your office, submit to oversight, accept an assigned handler, or treat the Ministry's authority over me as anything other than a courtesy I'm extending because cooperation is more efficient than the alternative. The alternative being, Xavier said. Today, Harry said. Demonstrated. A silence. Nothing happens to your people, Xavier said. Slowly. Finding the line. Nothing has happened to anyone, Harry said. I'd like to keep it that way. Xavier stood. Harry stood. They looked at each other across the low table, and what passed between them in that look was something more honest than the conversation had been, two people who understood each other clearly, which is a rarer thing than two people who agree. I'll need to speak with the minister, Xavier said. Of course, Harry said. This conversation isn't over. I'd be concerned if it was, Harry said. There's a great deal more to discuss. Xavier moved toward the door. Stopped. Turned back, with the particular quality of a man saying something off the record from the record. You're not what they prepared me for, he said. What did they prepare you for? Harry asked. Xavier looked at him, the boy with the scar and the crooked glasses and the entirely unbothered posture. Something easier, he said. He left. Harry stood in the open doorway and watched the 32 Aurors in the street receive Xavier's signal and begin to stand down. It was orderly. Professional. Xavier ran a tight operation, Harry would give him that. Logan appeared at Harry's shoulder. Well. He'll come back with better terms, Harry said. Not a win yet, Logan said. It's a start, Harry said. The first conversation is about whether you're serious. We answered that. The last Auror disapparated from the street. The quiet that followed had the particular quality of quiet after something significant, denser than ordinary quiet, loaded. Rogue came and stood on Harry's other side, looking at the empty street. That's it, she said. I practiced. Practiced what? Harry said. She made a gesture that suggested absorption and general chaos. Next time, Harry said. There's going to be a next time. There's always a next time, Logan said. Harry looked at the empty street. At the clear London sky. At the ordinary terraced houses opposite, behind which the world was entirely unaware of what had just happened in this one. He thought about Xavier's face. About the word easier. About the particular, honest, faintly surprised quality of a capable man recognizing that his preparation had been based on a false assumption. He put his hand in his pocket. Touched Captain. He has seniority, Harry had told Xavier, at 5 years old, in a car heading away from Surrey. He's been in the cupboard longer than I have. 11 years since that morning. 11 years of Logan's early runs and Xavier's careful teaching and Storm's clouds and Jean's patience and Rogue's friendship and all of it assembled into this, a person who stood in doorways of buildings that 32 Aurors had decided not to enter and felt, clearly and completely, like exactly themselves. "Coffee," Harry said, to the street, and then closed the door. Chapter 5, The Weight of Someone Else's Story. 3 days after the Bloomsbury standoff, Dumbledore came alone. No owl. No advance notice. Just the old wizard appearing at the front door of the Georgian Terrace at 7 in the evening with the expression of someone who had made a decision and arrived before he could unmake it. Harry answered the door himself, which surprised Dumbledore slightly, the slight lift of the eyebrows, quickly controlled. "May I come in?" Dumbledore asked. Harry stepped aside. They sat in the front room, the one with the good chairs and the bad lamp that Logan kept meaning to replace and hadn't. Harry made tea because Xavier had taught him that making tea was the civilized response to almost any situation, and because it gave him 2 minutes in the kitchen to think about what Dumbledore had decided before arriving that was different from what Dumbledore had decided in his office at Hogwarts. The difference was visible when Harry came back. In the office, Dumbledore had been the headmaster, positioned behind his desk, surrounded by his accumulated authority, functioning within a frame he controlled. Here, in a chair that was slightly too low for him, in a room he had no history with, he was simply an old man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had perhaps, tonight, decided to put some of it down. Harry poured tea. Saturday. Waited. "I owe you an honest conversation," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. "You do." Dumbledore looked at the tea. At his blackened hand. At the window where London moved past in its continuous, indifferent way. "I've spent 30 years preparing for a war," he said. "In 30 years of preparation you make decisions that seem necessary at the time. And occasionally, if you're honest with yourself, you examine those decisions and find that necessary and right occupied different positions that you preferred not to acknowledge." Harry said nothing. "Let it breathe." "Your parents trusted me," Dumbledore said. "James and Lily both. That trust it was not a small thing. It is not a small thing." He paused. "I told myself that placing you with your aunt and uncle, despite knowing their limitations, was the most defensible choice. The blood protection was real. The connection to your mother's sacrifice was real. The logic was sound." Another pause. "And the logic was also a way of not looking directly at what I was doing." "Which was?" Harry said. "Deciding that your childhood was less important than your preparation," Dumbledore said. "That a degree of hardship would produce the kind of person who could do what the prophecy required." He said it without flinching, which Harry noted. "I convinced myself that I was thinking about the greater good. I'm skilled at convincing myself of things." He looked at Harry directly. "I was wrong. I want to say that to you clearly, without equivocation. I was wrong." Harry held the man's gaze. The blue eyes were tired tonight, and old, and carrying the specific weight of someone who has found that being honestly wrong is considerably harder than being righteously certain. "I believe you," Harry said. Dumbledore exhaled slowly. Not relief exactly, more like something that had been braced releasing its tension fractionally. "That's not forgiveness," Harry said. "I want to be clear about that. It's a statement of fact. I believe you're telling the truth about what you think." "I understand the distinction," Dumbledore said. "Good." Harry wrapped his hands around his tea mug. "Now tell me the rest of what you came to say." Dumbledore looked at him with the expression that Harry had catalogued from the office at Hogwarts, the one that was recalibrating, finding the person across from him consistently other than expected. "There is a Horcrux," Dumbledore said. "That's the word for an object in which a wizard has concealed a fragment of their soul as a means of achieving a form of immortality. Voldemort made more than one." Harry was very still. "How many?" he said. "7 was his intention," Dumbledore said. 7 objects, 7 soul fragments. The 7th death, yours, was meant to complete the set. He had made 6 before Godric's Hollow. He paused. There are complications. The scar, Harry said. Dumbledore's expression shifted. You knew. I suspected, Harry said. Xavier helped me think it through. The second signal Cerebro picked up, the thing that didn't read as a mutation or as the other magic. Something nested. Something not mine. His voice was even, which was a thing he would think about later. There's a piece of him in me. Yes, Dumbledore said. Very quietly. The room was quiet. London moved past the window. Somewhere upstairs, Logan was doing something that involved boots on floorboards, the measured back and forth of someone pacing, which meant Logan had been listening from the landing and had just heard something that was making him pace. Tell me what that means, Harry said. Concretely. What does it mean for the Horcrux inside me? The Horcrux must be destroyed, Dumbledore said. In the original, in the plan I had constructed, before Professor Xavier found you, before everything changed, the mechanism of its destruction required your death. Voldemort's killing curse, aimed at you willingly received, would destroy the fragment without destroying your soul. He looked at his blackened hand. You would survive. But the path to that point required certain conditions. A certain kind of ignorance, on your part, about what was coming. Harry looked at him. You were going to tell me at the last moment, he said. I was going to tell you when I judged the time was right, Dumbledore said, which was the same thing, and he knew Harry knew it. How long have you known about the Horcrux in my scar? Harry asked. Since you were approximately 11 months old, Dumbledore said. Since Godric's Hollow. The silence had a different quality now. Not tense, something past tension, into the territory of things that are simply being seen clearly for what they are. So the entire plan, Harry said. My whole life. The Dursleys. The plan to bring me back to Hogwarts at 11, not knowing anything, humble and grateful and shaped. All of it was built around the fact that you needed me to walk into Voldemort's curse knowingly, at the right moment, without having had the kind of life that might make me reluctant to do it. Dumbledore said nothing. Which was its own answer. You needed me disposable, Harry said. Flat. Not angry. The quality he had when he was naming a thing. Not disposable like you didn't care. Disposable like you'd calculated the cost and decided the equation worked. I told myself, I know what you told yourself, Harry said. You told yourself it was necessary. You told yourself the greater good required it. You told yourself that a boy who had been raised in love and confidence and knowledge of his own worth would not be able to make the sacrifice, and so you needed a boy who had been raised just short of broken. He paused. Did it occur to you that a boy raised by the X-Men might find another way? The question landed in the room with the weight of something that had been traveling a long distance. Dumbledore looked at him. And in the tired, honest, old face something opened, not hope exactly, something more cautious than hope. Is there another way? He asked. I don't know yet, Harry said. But I'm going to find it. He stood up, went to the door of the front room, and opened it. Logan was indeed on the landing, which Harry had known for 20 minutes. Logan came down the stairs without any particular expression and sat in the chair Harry had vacated, across from Dumbledore, and looked at the old wizard with yellow eyes that didn't blink much. The kid's going to need everything you know, Logan said. All of it. The Horcruxes, where they are, what they are, how to destroy them. Everything. Dumbledore looked at Logan for a long moment. Yes, he said. I know. And if there's a way to get the one in his scar out without killing him, Logan said, your job is to find it. With everything you have. Not tomorrow. Starting now. I've been looking, Dumbledore said. Look harder, Logan said. Not unkind. Just the Logan version of please. Dumbledore reached into his robes and withdrew a small leather journal, dark with handling, filled with notes in the tiny, precise handwriting of someone who thought faster than they wrote. He set it on the table. "I've documented everything I know," he said. "The Horcruxes. The ones already destroyed. The ones remaining. My theories about the scar." He looked at the journal. "There is a possibility, a theoretical possibility, that the Horcrux in your scar could be separated without death. It would require a profound magical event. Something of sufficient power and specificity to target only the fragment without touching the host." Harry had come back to the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, listening. "What kind of event?" he asked. "Something I cannot generate alone," Dumbledore said. "Something perhaps no one in the wizarding world could generate alone." He looked at Harry. "But you are not only of the wizarding world." Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at the journal on the table. Thought about the gravity dial in his chest, and the mind-reaching, and the way both languages felt when they worked together, the rare occasions when he let them move simultaneously, not in sequence but in concert, the combined pressure of them like two rivers joining. He'd only done it fully twice, in controlled conditions with Xavier watching, and both times Xavier had afterward sat for a long moment in silence before saying anything. "I need Xavier in this conversation," Harry said. "I hoped you'd say that," Dumbledore said. Xavier came downstairs in his chair, unhurried, and the quality of the room changed when he entered it the way the quality of rooms changed when Xavier entered them, not through any deliberate projection, simply through the fact of his presence, the particular density of a mind that was always, gently and completely, paying attention. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked back. "Albus," Xavier said. "Charles," Dumbledore said. They had been having careful conversations for weeks, the two of them. But this one had a different quality. The usual management was absent, the careful framing that both men brought to conversations where they were measuring each other. What was left was two very old, very intelligent people who had each, in their own domains, seen what happened when you were too clever for too long and stopped checking your cleverness against reality. "He told you," Xavier said, to Harry. "Everything," Harry said. Xavier nodded. His hand rested on the arm of his chair and his fingers moved once, a small unconscious movement that Harry recognized as the Xavier equivalent of Logan's jaw, something processing. "The Horcrux," he said. "Yes. I've theorized about it since the beginning," Xavier said. "Since Cerebro. The second signal wasn't a second mutation. It was a foreign psychic presence embedded in Harry's scar tissue. I couldn't identify it because I had no framework for it." He looked at Dumbledore. "Now I do. Can you reach it?" Dumbledore asked. "With effort," Xavier said. "I've touched its edge twice during Harry's training, in the course of working on his deeper mental architecture. It's coherent. It has the quality of a mind, or the remnant of one. Something that was once a person and is now a fragment of what that person was." He paused. "It's also dormant. It's been dormant since the night Voldemort tried to kill Harry. The damage done to the larger soul seems to have silenced the fragment. Until Voldemort regains enough power to wake it," Dumbledore said. "Is that a timeline we're working against?" Harry asked. "Possibly," Xavier said. "I don't know when. But dormant is not gone." Harry sat down on the floor against the wall, which was what he did sometimes when he was thinking through something large, got low, got grounded, put his back against something solid. Logan looked at him and then looked at the ceiling in the way he did when he was deciding not to say something. "Walk me through the other Horcruxes," Harry said, to Dumbledore. "The ones still remaining." Dumbledore opened the leather journal. Turned to a page of dense notes. "Voldemort made 7. One was the diary, destroyed by you, with a basilisk fong, in your second year in what would have been your second year." He paused on the correction. "One is a locket, currently in the possession of a man named Mundungus Fletcher, who acquired it through theft from the house at Grimmauld Place. One is a cup, Helga Hufflepuff's cup, which I believe to be in a vault at Gringotts Bank. One is a diadem, lost for centuries, that I believe has found its way back to Hogwarts. One is Nagini, his snake, which has been with him since his return to corporeal form. And one, me, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. So including me, Harry said, there are 5 remaining. The locket, the cup, the diadem, the snake, and the scar. Yes. Harry looked at Xavier. Can we do it? He said. Get mine out, without, I don't know yet, Xavier said honestly. The theory is sound. Magnitsky, the professor I worked with on the wards, has a framework for isolating magical constructs within a living host. If we can translate that framework to a psychic intervention, combined with your own ability to access both magical systems simultaneously, he stopped. It would be unlike anything either of us has done. It would require complete control. And it would require that the fragment be wakened enough to locate precisely, but not so wakened that it could defend itself. So we'd need to provoke it slightly, Harry said. Yes. Without bringing Voldemort's attention with it, Harry said. Yes. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, how soon can you design a protocol for it? 3 weeks, Xavier said. Perhaps 4. 3, Harry said. Harry, Xavier said. He's moving, Harry said. Dumbledore said 3 incidents on the continent. Whatever dormant means for the fragment, if Voldemort is building strength, that clock is running. Xavier looked at him for a long moment. 3 weeks, he said. But you train every day until then. No gaps. When do I take gaps? Harry said. Fair point, Xavier said. Scrimgeour came back on Saturday. He came alone, which was either a statement of good faith or the calculation that good faith was currently more effective than force, and Harry suspected it was both and didn't mind either. The man was intelligent enough to be genuinely useful if the relationship could be made to function, and Harry had decided 3 days ago that making it function was worth the investment. They sat in the kitchen this time, which Harry found was a better room for honest conversations than the front room. The front room had the quality of a space where positions were maintained, while kitchens were where people said things because there was coffee there and the kettle was on and it seemed like the time. The minister has agreed to a working arrangement, Scrimgeour said, with the crisp precision of someone who has gotten something done and is not going to perform enthusiasm about it. Autonomy, as you outlined. No oversight. No registration. Information sharing on a voluntary basis, case by case. What does the minister get out of it? Harry asked. The knowledge that you're operating with some awareness of ministry intelligence, Scrimgeour said. Which means if we have information relevant to what you're doing, we can get it to you. Faster than you'd get it otherwise. Fair, Harry said. What do you need from me? Discretion, Scrimgeour said. When you operate. The prophet is, he paused, choosing his word, agitated. There are stories. Some accurate, some not. The minister's position is that public knowledge of the full extent of your abilities, and specifically your associations, would create a panic that we're not currently equipped to manage. I'm not going to hide what I am, Harry said. I'm not asking you to hide it, Scrimgeour said. I'm asking you not to perform it, publicly, in front of journalists. He paused. It's a distinction. Harry looked at him. Who wrote the prophet stories? Rita Skeeter, Scrimgeour said. She has sources. Her sources are not always people I'd have chosen as sources. Umbridge, Harry said. Scrimgeour's expression didn't change, which was itself confirmation. The senior undersecretary's position on your situation is not one the minister currently shares, he said, carefully. Umbridge believes in comprehensive approaches. She wants me in a cell, Harry said. She wants you categorized, Scrimgeour said. Which in her framework amounts to the same thing. He looked at Harry across the kitchen table. She's going to be a problem. I want you to know that I'm aware of it. Does she know about the Horcruxes? Harry asked. Scrimgeour stilled. That's not information that's widely held within the Ministry. I'll take that as a no, Harry said. Good. Keep it that way. He paused. The Horcruxes are the priority. Before Voldemort, before Ministry arrangements, before everything. There are 5 remaining objects, including one in my scar. Getting them destroyed, and getting mine out without dying, is what everything else is organized around. Scrimgeour looked at him with the yellow eyes that had assessed 30 years of dangerous situations. The one in your scar, he said. Yes. And you have a plan. Xavier has a plan, Harry said. Which is functionally better than having my own. Scrimgeour was quiet for a moment. He looked out the kitchen window at the London street, ordinary and grey and unconcerned. What do you need from the Ministry, he said. For the Horcruxes. Concretely. Harry thought about the leather journal. The list. Access to Gringotts, he said. There's an object in a vault. The Ministry can facilitate that in ways I can't manage alone without breaking several laws I'd prefer not to break. Which vault? Bellatrix Lestrange's, Harry said. Scrimgeour's expression was the expression of a man doing arithmetic with very large numbers. That's not a simple request. No, Harry agreed. But it's a necessary one. I'll see what I can do, Scrimgeour said. And then, with the quality of someone being honest in a way they hadn't planned to be, you're doing this right, you know. Not what I expected, but, right. What did you expect? Harry said. Scrimgeour looked at him. Something angrier, he said. Given everything. I was angry, Harry said. At 10. At 12. At 14. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. Then I figured out that anger at the right things, properly directed, is useful. And anger at everything is just noise. Scrimgeour stood, buttoned his coat. The Lestrange vault, he said. I'll send word. He left. Harry sat at the kitchen table for a moment after the door closed, listening to the house. The particular sound of it, Logan's footsteps upstairs, Storm in the back garden doing something atmospheric, Rogue's music through the ceiling, Xavier's chair in the front room. He'd been thinking, since Dumbledore's visit, about what had been said and what was underneath what had been said. About the prophecy and the plan and the shape of the life that had been constructed around him before he was old enough to have an opinion about it. He'd been thinking about his mother, specifically about what Xavier had said at 10, about Lily Potter's particular brand of courage. Deliberate, not reckless. She'd died for him. That was a fact he lived inside, had lived inside since he was 10. She'd stood between him and a killing curse and she'd done it fully knowing what it was, and the love in that act had been powerful enough to change the rules. Xavier had told him that. The choice, the love, the full knowledge, that was what had made the protection real. He thought about what that meant. Not sentimentally, Harry was not generally sentimental, but structurally. The act had required everything. No reservation, no exit strategy. She had given everything she had, unconditionally, and the power of that complete giving was what had bent the curse back. He thought about the Horcrux in his scar. About Xavier's plan. About what it might require. He didn't tell Logan what he was thinking, because Logan would pace, and Logan pacing was loud and distracting. He didn't tell Rogue, because Rogue would look at him with the look that meant she already knew and was waiting for him to catch up with her, which was her version of concern and was somehow worse than being told directly. He didn't tell Xavier, because Xavier would find it anyway. He found Captain in his jacket pocket and set the small soldier on the kitchen table. "What do you think?" he said. Captain stood at attention, one-armed, seniority intact. "Yeah," Harry said. "I think so too." The thing about Hogwarts was that it kept finding reasons to pull him back. Hermione old twice a week with research, dense, meticulous, cross-referenced research that Harry had started specifically requesting because it was better than anything he could compile himself in the time available. She had found 3 academic papers on soul magic, one of which contained a footnote that referenced a failed 19th-century experiment in Horcrux extraction that Xavier had immediately called significant. Ron sent shortbread. Harry ate all of it. He went back to Hogwarts on a Wednesday because Dumbledore had told to say there was something in the castle he needed to see, and because Hermione's latest letter had contained 6 starred items and a note that said, "I think I've found something about the diadem, please come as soon as you can, this is important," in a handwriting that was slightly less controlled than usual, which meant she was excited and trying not to show it. He went alone this time. Logan knew but didn't come, which was the kind of trust that Logan expressed through absence rather than presence. McGonagall met him at the gate again. The meeting was different this time, the crisp formality was there, the institutional bearing, but underneath it something that had shifted over the last 2 weeks. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him after the Auror corridor, with the attentiveness of a teacher reconsidering the category she'd put a student in, and Harry found he liked her, specifically because she was willing to reconsider. "Professor Dumbledore is in his office," she said. "Miss Granger has been in the library since 6 this morning." She paused. She went to breakfast for 17 minutes and then went back. "That's a long time for her," Harry said. "It is," McGonagall said, with the very particular expression of someone who has taught Hermione Granger for 4 years and has opinions. "She's found something. I don't know what, because she told me it was need to know, which is not language I typically accept from 15-year-old students, but..." A pause. "I made an exception. She has good instincts about what matters," Harry said. McGonagall looked at him. "So do you," she said. Then, with the manner of someone who has decided something, "For what it's worth, Mr. Potter, what you did at Bloomsbury. How you handled Scrimgeour." She stopped. "You handled it correctly. More correctly than many adults in this world have handled things with much greater resources available to them." Harry looked at her. "Thank you," he said. Simply, without deflection. She nodded once, briskly, in the manner of someone who has said a thing and considers it said and complete. "The library," she said. Hermione had a table and a half covered in books. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that she'd organized them into 3 distinct piles with a separate parchment for each pile's notation system, which meant she'd been here long enough to develop an organizational framework for the specific problem, which meant she'd found something worth organizing around. She looked up when Harry arrived, and her expression had the quality he recognized, the barely contained energy of someone holding information that needed to be shared. "The diadem," she said, before he'd sat down. "Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem. Lost for centuries, that's what Dumbledore's notes say, that's what the historical record says. But I found," she pulled a book from the middle pile, opened it to a flagged page, "there's a ghost. In Ravenclaw Tower. She's called the Grey Lady. Helena Ravenclaw. Rowena's daughter. The records say she stole the diadem from her mother and hid it. The ghost knows where it is." Harry looked at the page. "Has anyone asked her?" "That's the thing," Hermione said. "People have asked. Students, over the centuries. She won't tell anyone." She looked at Harry. "But there are accounts, 3 of them, across different periods, that suggest she's told people who were able to," she paused, choosing her word carefully, "reach her. Emotionally. She's unhappy. She's been unhappy for 700 years. The accounts describe a specific quality of interaction that caused her to speak, and in all 3 cases the person was described as being able to understand her grief without judgment." Harry was quiet for a moment. "A ghost who's been alone with her guilt for 700 years, he said. "Yes," Hermione said. He thought about cupboards. About the quality of solitude that had the weight of judgment in it. About what it felt like to carry something for a very long time without anyone acknowledging what the carrying cost. "Take me to her," Harry said. Ravenclaw Tower was a different kind of place from the rest of the castle, quieter, with the quality of rooms where people came to think. The Grey Lady was in the uppermost corridor, and she was exactly what the description in Hermione's research had prepared Harry for, beautiful in the way of something that had been preserved past the moment of its meaning, with the expression of someone who has been sorry for something for longer than sorry should last. Harry stood at a distance from her and she looked at him with the wariness that ghosts had around people who wanted things. "I don't have questions," Harry said. She looked at him. "I just wanted to see you," he said. "Hermione told me about you. About your mother's diadem. About why you took it." He was quiet for a moment. "I know what it's like to want something that belongs to someone else and then carry what the wanting cost." The Grey Lady looked at him with 700 years in her eyes. "I'm not going to ask you for anything," Harry said. "I wanted you to know that we know the diadem matters. And that when we find it, because we will find it, one way or another, the reason you took it isn't going to be forgotten. You took it because you wanted to be as wise as your mother and you didn't know how else to get there. That's a human thing. That's a thing worth understanding." Silence in the corridor. The torches burned. The Grey Lady was very still. "Room of requirement," she said. Very quietly. "It's been there for centuries. It goes where no one can find it, but it's there. In the place where things are hidden." "Thank you," Harry said. She looked at him for another moment. "You're not what I expected," she said. "I've been hearing that a lot," Harry said. Something in her expression shifted, the grief still there, always there, but something alongside it that hadn't been there a moment ago. Almost warmth. She drifted away down the corridor. Harry stood where he was for a moment, then turned back to Hermione, who had been standing 6 feet behind him with a quill at the ready and had been writing notes. "Room of requirement," Hermione said. "The place where things are hidden," Harry said. "Rogue found it by accident last week. She said it gave her exactly what she needed." "We need to go there," Hermione said. "We do," Harry said. "But not today. Today I need to see Dumbledore." Dumbledore was behind his desk when Harry arrived. The blackened hand was more prominent today, resting on the desk rather than hidden in a sleeve, and Harry looked at it directly and then at Dumbledore, and Dumbledore looked back with the honesty he'd been bringing to their conversation since the Georgian terrace. "The ring," Harry said. "That's a Horcrux wound. You destroyed one. Last year," Dumbledore said. "The ring of Marvolo Gaunt. I was less careful than I should have been. There was a curse on the stone and he paused. I saw something I wanted to see, and it caused me to touch the ring before neutralizing the curse fully." "What did you see?" Harry asked. Dumbledore looked at his hand. "My sister," he said. "Ariana. She died when I was young, in circumstances that I have spent most of my life carrying responsibility for." Harry looked at the old wizard. "You touched it because you wanted to see her." "Yes. Even knowing it was a Horcrux." "Even knowing," Dumbledore said. Quietly. "Which is how I know, more completely than I knew before, that Voldemort's power is not merely in his magic. It's in his understanding of what people want. He makes objects that are beautiful exactly where you're most vulnerable." Harry was quiet for a moment. "How long?" he asked. "The curse is managed," Dumbledore said. "Snape is, Severus has done what can be done. But managed is not healed, and it progresses." He met Harry's eyes. "I have perhaps a year. Perhaps less." The office was very still. Fawkes on his perch shifted and made a small, liquid sound that fell in the silence like something kind. Harry looked at Dumbledore. This man who had made decisions about his life that were wrong, who had apologized without equivocating, who was currently sitting across from him with a dying hand and a year to live and had just told him this plainly, without asking for anything in return. "Then we move faster," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Locket, cup, diadem, snake," Harry said. In that order. The scar is last because the scar requires the most preparation and I need Xavier's protocol to be ready. He paused. Scrimgeour is working on Gringotts' access for the cup. The diadem is at Hogwarts, in the room of requirement. Dumbledore looked at him, and in his expression was something that was not quite hope and not quite relief but was in the territory of both, the expression of a man who has been steering a ship alone for a very long time and has just seen someone capable take the wheel. You didn't need me to tell you any of this, Dumbledore said. I needed your notes, Harry said. And your honesty. Those mattered. Dumbledore nodded slowly. Then, there's one more thing I should tell you. He withdrew a folded letter from his robes, the paper yellowed. This was your mother's. She wrote it the night before Godric's Hollow. She gave it to me to keep. I should have given it to you when you were younger. He held it out. I'm sorry for that. Harry took the letter. Held it. He could feel his mother's handwriting through the paper somehow, which was not possible and was completely true. He put it in his jacket pocket, beside Captain. I'll read it tonight, he said. He left the office and went back down through the castle, through the corridors that tracked him with portrait eyes and creaking suits of armor, and out into the grounds where the October wind was doing something definitive about leaves. He walked to the lake and sat on the bank where he'd sat that first clear morning, before any of this had properly started. He took out the letter. His mother's handwriting was neat and quick, the handwriting of someone who thought fast and wrote to keep up with herself. The letter was dated October 30th, 1981, the night before Godric's Hollow. My Harry, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm writing it because your father is asleep and I can't sleep and I want to say something to you that I might not get the chance to say in person. You are going to be extraordinary. Not because of anything that was done to you or because of any prophecy or because of anything anyone has decided about you. Because of what you already are, at 15 months, which is someone who looks at everything with complete attention and isn't afraid of any of it. Whatever happens tomorrow or the day after, I need you to know that what I'm doing, what I'd do, what I will do if it comes to it, is not a sacrifice. It's a choice. There's a difference. A sacrifice is something taken. A choice is something given. I would give everything I have for you without hesitation, without grief, without reservation. That's not loss. That's love, which is the only genuinely inexhaustible thing I know of. Find people who are worth being found by. Let them in. The world is full of people who will want to use what you are. Find the ones who simply want you to be it. I love you. I'm not afraid. Mum. Harry sat by the lake for a long time. The light changed from afternoon to early evening and the water went from gray to gold to gray again and he sat in it and read the letter twice more and then folded it carefully and put it back in his pocket, beside Captain. He thought about I'm not afraid. He thought about what it meant to come from that. He'd been told his whole life, in Surrey, in his own head, in the careful curriculum of Xavier's training, that fear was something to manage, something to understand, something to direct usefully rather than be ruled by. And he'd built something good from that, something solid. But his mother had written I'm not afraid the night before she died and it hadn't been performance. He could feel that through the paper, through the handwriting. She hadn't been afraid because she knew exactly what she was choosing and the why was large enough to make the what manageable. He thought about Xavier's protocol. About the Horcrux in his scar. About what it might take. He wasn't afraid either. He wanted to know that he wasn't just telling himself he wasn't afraid. He pressed on it the way you press on a bruise to find its edges. No. Not afraid. Paying close attention. Which was, as he'd told Storm on the roof, different. He stood up. The lake reflected the last of the evening light. Somewhere behind him, across the grounds, the castle was warm with internal light, hundreds of students inside it going about the ordinary work of being 15 and 14 and 17 and learning things and eating dinner and being alive in the uncomplicated, miraculous way of people who haven't yet been asked to pay for it. He thought, I'm going to make sure they stay that way. Not because a prophecy said so. Because his mother had written a letter at midnight while his father slept, and it had sat in Dumbledore's keeping for 15 years, and it had found its way to his pocket on an October evening by a Scottish lake, and it said, "Find the ones who simply want you to be it." He had found them. He had been found by them. He put his hands in his pockets, both of them, Captain on the left and the letter on the right, and he walked back up toward the castle. The diadem was in the room of requirement. The locket was with a man named Mundungus Fletcher. The cup was in a vault that Scrimgeour was working on. The snake was with Voldemort, which meant that problem was last. And the scar was his, for 3 more weeks, until Xavier had a protocol and they did something unprecedented and terrifying and necessary. 5 left. One of them his. He thought, Mom. Watch this. He walked through the castle doors. Chapter 6, Neither Can Live. The protocol took 18 days. Xavier barely slept for most of them. Harry knew this because Harry barely slept either, and the Bloomsbury house had thin enough walls and old enough floorboards that the sound of Xavier's chair at 2 a.m. was a familiar feature of those 18 days, the soft electrical whir of it moving from his room to the study and back, the particular quality of the house's night silence when someone else was also awake in it and thinking hard. They didn't talk about it directly. They talked around it the way 2 people talk around something large, obliquely, in pieces, building the shape of it through accumulated conversation rather than one definitive discussion. Xavier would mention a calculation at breakfast and Harry would respond with a question that moved the calculation forward, and Logan would sit at the end of the table eating toast and pretending to read the newspaper, and nobody said we are building a plan to extract a piece of Voldemort's soul from Harry's scar, but that was what all of it was. Hermione came to London on the 3rd weekend, because she had found 2 more relevant texts and because she was Hermione and finding relevant texts meant going where the relevant situation was. Ron came because Hermione came, and because he had another package of his mother's shortbread and an invitation from Arthur Weasley, who wanted to meet Harry so urgently that Ron had been told to deliver the invitation verbally as well as in writing, which he did with the practiced resignation of someone accustomed to parental enthusiasm. Harry met Arthur Weasley in the kitchen of the Bloomsbury house on a Saturday morning, and Arthur Weasley arrived with the energy of a man who had been looking forward to something enormously and had promised himself he would contain the energy and was already failing. He shook Harry's hand with both of his, looked around the kitchen at Logan and Storm and Rogue, and said, in a voice of genuine, complete wonder, "Extraordinary. Simply extraordinary. And the telekinesis, you can actually manipulate gravitational fields? Not just objects but the fields themselves. Because I have a theory about whether that intersects with certain classes of levitation charms that nobody in the wizarding world has ever, Dad," Ron said. "Yes," Arthur said, not stopping. "Harry, you must forgive me. I work with Muggle artifacts and the intersection of magical and non-magical physics is a particular interest, and you represent something completely unprecedented in that intersection, and I am deeply, genuinely delighted to meet you." Harry looked at this man, red-haired, earnest, entirely without guile, vibrating with the authentic enthusiasm of someone who had found a thing fascinating and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. He thought about Vernon Dursley's carefully managed suspicion of everything that departed from the expected. He thought about what a different thing this was. "The gravitational fields," Harry said. "Ask me your questions." Ron's expression said this had been the wrong thing to say in terms of getting his father to leave within the hour, but also the right thing to say in every other sense. Arthur Weasley sat down, produced a small notebook from his coat pocket, and asked questions for 45 minutes with the focused intensity of a man for whom the answers were genuinely useful. Harry answered all of them. At some point Molly Weasley's voice emerged from the small charmed mirror on the counter asking whether Arthur had had breakfast yet, and Arthur said yes in the tone of someone who had not, and Harry quietly put bread in the toaster. Logan watched this from his chair in the corner with the specific expression of someone who has spent 30 years convincing himself he doesn't care about people and has been gradually, over the last 15 years, proven wrong. The diadem came first, because it was accessible. Harry went to the room of requirement with Hermione and Rogue on a Tuesday, which was the day Hogwarts felt most like a working place rather than a monument, students in corridors, smell of chalk and dinner from somewhere below, the castle settled into the ordinary rhythm of a school day. The room of requirement presented itself as the place where things are hidden, and they went in. It was vast. Impossibly, architecturally improbably vast, a place where generations of students had stashed their unwanted things, creating a landscape of discarded objects stacked and balanced into precarious mountain ranges that stretched into a darkness too far away to see clearly. It smelled of old things, of wood and metal and the particular quality of objects that have been carrying their histories in the dark for a long time. "How do we find it in here?" Rogue said, looking at the mountains of accumulated debris. Harry closed his eyes. Let the gravity language speak. Every object in the room had weight, and the diadem was old and saturated with dark magic and the particular density of something that had been made wrong, and that wrongness had a signature he could feel if he was quiet enough about it. He turned left. Walked for 3 minutes through the maze of discarded things. Stopped in front of a cabinet with a broken mirror, on top of which, balanced on a stone bust wearing a wig, was a crown of dark metal set with a single sapphire. He could feel it from 2 feet away, the wrongness, the presence inside it, the coiled darkness of a fragment of something that had once been a person and was now a wound in the fabric of things. "That's it," Hermione said, from beside him. She'd brought a basilisk fong, secured from Dumbledore's collection, which was what they'd agreed destroyed Horcruxes reliably. She held it now with the careful grip of someone who had prepared for exactly this. Harry looked at the diadem. "I'm going to hold it stable," he said. "The fragment will react when you strike. Be fast." He reached out with the gravity language and held the diadem in place, not moving it, just anchoring it, the way you brace something before a blow. Felt the Horcrux inside it pulse with sudden dark awareness, a sensation like touching something hot through thick cloth. Hermione struck with the fong. The sound was wrong in a way that sounds in that room shouldn't have been wrong, a shriek that didn't come from any throat, something that passed through the air like a feeling rather than a noise, and a darkness that bloomed briefly from the diadem before collapsing inward. Then silence. Then an ordinary piece of metal on a stone bust, the sapphire cracked, the wrongness gone out of it completely. Hermione set the fong down. Her hands were steady, which Harry noted and respected. "Free," he said. "Free down," Rogue said. 2 to go before, she stopped herself. "Before mine," Harry said. "Yes." The locket was retrieved from Mundungus Fletcher 4 days later, which required a conversation with Mundungus Fletcher, and Mundungus Fletcher was the kind of person who required a very specific kind of conversation. Logan handled most of it. Fletcher surrendered the locket with a speed that suggested he had been anticipating this particular consequence of the theft for some time and was relieved, in a way, that the uncertainty was over. The locket was destroyed in the basement of the Bloomsbury house, which was where Dumbledore brought it, with a basilisk fong and Harry holding the thing stable while the Horcrux inside screamed images at everyone in the room: Logan's losses, Rogue's isolation, Harry's cupboard, Storm's captivity, things taken from each of them and displayed with the particular cruelty of something that understood what hurt people and aimed accordingly. Harry held it stable and felt all of it and did not let go. When it was done, Logan said, "That's 4. The Gringotts Cup required Scrimgeour, a legal order, 2 goblins whose professional dignity was maintained throughout despite circumstances they found extraordinary, and Harry, who had to convince the Sword of Gryffindor, which Dumbledore had brought in a velvet bag with the expression of a man producing something slightly embarrassing, to serve as the destructive instrument, since basilisk venom was transferable. Grip Hook, the goblin who led them to the vault, looked at Harry the entire time with an expression that was unreadable to most people and legible to Harry as, "I have an opinion about wizards but I am revising my category for this particular one." Harry looked back at Grip Hook once, when they were done, and said, "Thank you. Your cooperation in this matters." And Grip Hook looked at him with the slight adjustment of a creature who has been thanked specifically rather than generically, which was an unusual experience. 5 down. 1 remaining. The snake. And Harry's scar. Xavier's protocol was ready on day 19. He explained it in the study of the Bloomsbury house, with Dumbledore present and Logan and Rogue, and he explained it in the precise, unhurried way of a man who has thought through every component and is presenting it not as a request for approval but as a shared understanding before execution. The protocol required Harry to enter a state of deep, focused awareness, deeper than sleep, shallower than unconsciousness, the specific meditative territory that Xavier had been training him towards since he was 8. In that state, Xavier would access the deepest layer of Harry's psychic architecture, the place where the fragment lived, embedded in the scar tissue, dormant but coherent. From the outside, with his telepathy, Xavier would locate and map the fragment's boundaries, the exact territory where Voldemort's soul ended and Harry's began. Then Harry, from the inside, using both languages simultaneously, the gravity and the mind-reaching working together in the way they'd never been used together at full capacity, would apply targeted pressure to the boundary. Not destruction, the fragment couldn't be destroyed while Voldemort lived. But separation. Enough to sever the connection between the fragment and its host. Then the fragment, separated, could be contained. Dumbledore had a vessel, a constructed box of runic crystal that could hold a psychic presence, and Xavier would move the fragment from the scar into containment. Quickly. Before it could orient and resist. Worst case, Xavier said. The fragment wakes fully during the process and has enough coherence to fight the extraction. If that happens, I hold it, Harry said. With the gravity language. Pin it in place while you work. That's going to be painful, Xavier said. I know, Harry said. Significantly painful, Xavier said. I know, Harry said. Logan said nothing. He was sitting very still in the corner of the study, which was the Logan version of a very loud thing. Best case, Xavier said. 20 minutes. You'll be unconscious during, and disoriented afterward. The scar itself may, I don't know exactly what happens to the scar when its occupant leaves. I don't have a precedent for this. One way to find out, Harry said. Dumbledore, who had been quiet through Xavier's explanation, said, I want to say something before we proceed. Everyone looked at him. I spent 15 years building a plan that treated this boy's life as a component, Dumbledore said. He was looking at Harry. What you're doing now, this plan, which is yours, built from your choices, with your people, it is better. Not just in moral terms. It is strategically superior. You found a way I didn't look for because I had convinced myself it didn't exist. He paused. I wanted to say that while I still can. Harry looked at him. Help us with Nagini, he said. After this. She's the last one, and Voldemort keeps her close, and that's the one that's going to require everyone. I'll do everything in my remaining capacity, Dumbledore said. I know you will, Harry said. They did the extraction at midnight, because the house was quiet then and the city outside was close enough to sleep that its noise didn't bleed through the walls the way daytime London did. Harry lay on the study couch. Xavier was beside him. Dumbledore was in the corner with the crystal box in his hands, held with the care of someone holding something that needed to receive something terrible with precision. Rogue was at the door. Logan was standing against the far wall with his arms folded, and Harry, from his horizontal position, looked at Logan once before he closed his eyes and Logan looked back. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be said. 10 years of early mornings and thrown knives and broken chairs and coffee and the specific, practiced language of trust that develops between a teacher and a student who have taken each other seriously, all of it was in that look, complete. Harry closed his eyes. Xavier's voice in his mind was familiar as his own heartbeat. Ready? Ready. The descent was not like sleep. Sleep was passive, you fell into it the way you fell into water, giving yourself to it. This was the opposite of passive, a deliberate going down, a conscious moving through of the layers of his own mind, Xavier's presence alongside him like a hand on a wall in a dark corridor, steadying rather than leading. Deeper. The surface noise went first, the sensory input, the physical awareness of the couch and the room. Then the middle layers, the running thoughts, the memory associations, the constant quiet hum of the telepathic reception he'd spent 10 years learning to manage. Deeper still, into the architecture Xavier had helped him build from the age of 8, the walls, the rooms, the structured interior landscape of a mind that had been trained by one of the world's greatest telepaths. And there, at the foundation of it, the fragment. He'd touched its edge before, carefully, always pulling back. Now he looked at it directly. It sat in the deepest layer of his scar like something that had been there so long it had grown into the structure, not comfortably, not peacefully, but with the grim persistence of a thing that had survived by embedding itself too deep to easily remove. It was aware of him. He could feel that. The dormancy shifting, the fragment coming toward consciousness the way something in winter comes toward warmth, slow, instinctive, not yet directed. Now, Xavier said in his mind. Map it. Feel the edges. Harry reached with the mind language, pressing carefully around the fragment's perimeter. It was the most precise thing he'd ever done with telepathy, finer than wall building, finer than reception management, the telepathic equivalent of threading a needle in the dark. He found where Voldemort ended and he began. He traced it all the way around. Then he brought the gravity language in. This was the unprecedented part. The two languages working in concert, the mind-reaching and the gravity, the psychic and the magical, both of them simultaneously, both of them at full capacity. He had done it twice before in controlled conditions and both times Xavier had sat in silence afterward for a full minute. He understood now why. The combined pressure of them wasn't additive. It was something else, something that multiplied rather than added, and the feeling of it was like standing at the center of something that was trying to move in every direction at once and holding it still through nothing but the completeness of your own will. The fragment woke. It came fully awake between one moment and the next, and the first thing it did was push back, because it was a piece of Voldemort's soul and Voldemort's soul did not passively accommodate. The pain was significant. Xavier had been accurate about significant. It moved through Harry's scar and into the surrounding tissue and deeper, a burning that was both physical and not physical, the body protesting an event that had no category in its experience. Harry held on. Pressed the gravity language harder against the fragment's boundaries, feeling it strain against the containment, feeling it try to find the edge of what he was doing and get around it. He did not let it get around it. He thought about his mother writing a letter at midnight. He thought about Logan on the hill above Hogsmeade, not running. He thought about Xavier in a Surrey kitchen, looking at a child sleeping in a cupboard under a staircase, and choosing. He thought about Rogue at 2 a.m. with a bowl of cereal, and storm-shaping clouds in the morning, and Ron Weasley's ears going red, and Hermione striking a Horcrux Fong first with steady hands. He thought about Captain the One-Armed Soldier, standing guard. He held on. I have it, Xavier said. The voice was controlled and tight in the way of a man performing absolute precision under enormous pressure. I have the boundary. Harry, hold it for 10 more seconds. Just 10. Harry held it for 10 more seconds. The extraction felt like something leaving that had been part of him for 15 years, not nothing, not painless, but not the catastrophe it could have been. More like a deep splinter being drawn. The fragment screamed, in the way it had screamed when the diadem was struck, and the scream was in his mind rather than the air, and then it was across the room, and Dumbledore's voice said something sharp and specific in Latin, and the crystal box closed. Silence. Harry opened his eyes. The ceiling of the study. The bad lamp. Logan's face appearing in his field of vision, looking at him with an expression that was doing its absolute best to be neutral and was not quite managing it. You're bleeding, Logan said. The scar. Harry said. The scar, Logan said. Harry reached up and touched his forehead. His fingers came away with blood, and underneath the blood the scar felt different. Still there. Still the shape of a lightning bolt pressed into his skin. But different. Empty, in a way that it hadn't been since before he could remember. Like a room after furniture has been removed, the same dimensions, but changed by the absence. He sat up carefully. Xavier was very still in his chair, his eyes closed, both hands on the armrests, the quality of someone who had just performed something demanding and was allowing themselves 30 seconds to recover. Dumbledore was holding the crystal box with both hands and looking at it the way you look at something dangerous that has been safely contained. Rogue was in the doorway and she looked at Harry and said, "Well. It worked," Harry said. How do you feel?" Harry took stock. He felt wrung out in the way that deep psychic work left him wrung out, the functional equivalent of having run a very long way, a bone tiredness that was specific to the mind rather than the body. The scar ached. Everything else was present and accounted for. "Lighter," he said. And then, because it was accurate, "cleaner." Logan made the sound adjacent to a laugh. Xavier opened his eyes. Looked at Harry with the expression that Harry had seen across 18 years of study and training and early mornings and difficult conversations, the expression of complete, genuine, unperformed care. "How's the wall?" he said. Harry checked. Pressed against his own architecture. Checked the foundations, the rooms, the carefully built structure of a mind that had spent 10 years being trained by the best psychic on the planet. Found it, intact. Found what had been removed, gone. Found himself, entirely, completely, groundedly himself. "Solid," he said. Xavier let out a breath. "Good," he said. Then, quietly, "Well done." Voldemort moved 3 days later. Harry felt it before the owl arrived, a disturbance in the psychic landscape, something forceful and suddenly present that had been absent before, like a pressure system arriving over the horizon. He was in the kitchen at 6 a.m. when the feeling hit him and he sat with it for a moment, orienting, identifying it. Then the Ministry owl crashed through the kitchen window, which Logan had left open, and the letter it carried was from Scrimgeour and it said 3 words before the longer explanation: "He's back. Tonight." The Death Eaters moved on the Ministry itself at 8 p.m., and on Hogsmeade at 9, and on the Hogwarts gates at 9:30. Harry knew this because Scrimgeour's updates came in 30-minute intervals and because Hermione, who had gotten a message through Ron's father, was sending frantic owls. He knew it also because the psychic landscape was lit up in a way it had never been lit up, dozens of minds in terror, and underneath them all, the vast and terrible presence of something that had been accumulating power for 15 years and had finally decided it was enough. Voldemort's mind, from this distance, was the most frightening thing Harry had ever touched with his telepathy. Not because it was powerful, though it was. But because it was familiar. The fragment in his scar had been dormant for 15 years and now it wasn't, and what it was part of was, large. Cold. The way deep space is cold, not the absence of warmth but the active presence of something that warmth couldn't survive. Harry stood at the center of the Bloomsbury kitchen and felt all of it, and sorted all of it, and turned to the 5 people in the room, Logan, Scott, Storm, Rogue, Xavier, and said, "Hogwarts. Now." Nobody asked questions. They moved. The Blackbird covered the distance in minutes, Scott at the controls, the plane dropping through clouds toward the lights of Scotland, and Harry sat in the back and did what he did before everything, breathed, and paid attention, and found the clear space at the center of the noise. He thought about Nagini. The last Horcrux. The snake would be with Voldemort, which meant the plan they'd worked out with Dumbledore 3 days ago, Dumbledore's specific, careful, prepared plan for Nagini, the one contingency he'd insisted on being allowed to execute himself, needed to be in motion. He reached for his phone. Called Dumbledore's number, which the old wizard had accepted with the baffled dignity of a man for whom mobile phones were a novelty requiring formal acknowledgement. The phone rang twice. Dumbledore answered. "I'm at the gate," Dumbledore said. His voice was clear and steady and tired. "I know about the snake. Are you ready?" Harry asked. "I've been ready for 30 years, Dumbledore said. Just perhaps not in the direction I anticipated." "Take care of yourself," Harry said. A pause. The sound of wind at the gate of Hogwarts, and beyond it the sounds of a battle beginning. "Take care of them," Dumbledore said. All of them. The call ended. The blackbird set down in the Hogwarts grounds in the dark, and the battle was already in the grounds, Death Eaters at the gate, Aurors holding the perimeter, students in the castle, the night lit orange with spellfire in a way that was both theatrical and genuinely terrible. Harry was out of the plane before it fully stopped moving, Logan beside him, and the first thing he did was reach out with the gravity language across the battlefield and find the things that shouldn't be there. Death Eaters wearing dark robes and silver masks moved like they thought darkness was their environment. Harry adjusted their relationship with the ground and they stopped moving. 12 of them, rooted like the Aurors in the Bloomsbury courtyard had been rooted, and the Hogwarts Aurors looked at the 12 stopped Death Eaters and then at Harry and made quick, grateful use of the opportunity. Storm went up. Literally, she rose from the ground on a column of her own wind and the sky above the battle changed, because storm angry was a different proposition from storm measured. The lightning she brought down was precise, specific, grounded in the earth 10 meters from any human being, and the sound of it landing was enough to scatter the Death Eaters' formation by itself. Scott cut through the outer perimeter with his visor at full power, clearing space with the focused, tactical efficiency of someone who had run 100 scenarios in training and was now executing the real one. Logan went through the center, faster than anything his size should have been, and the Death Eaters in his path made the decision to redirect quickly. Rogue, with her long gloves and her flying ability, acquired from Carol Danvers years ago and permanent, went for the air, and there were Death Eaters on broomsticks, and then there were Death Eaters falling off broomsticks very quickly because Rogue flew the way she did most physical things, completely and without hesitation. Harry moved through the middle of all of it. He was not running. He was walking, deliberately, in the particular way Logan had taught him, centered, weighted, present, and the battle organized itself around him in a way that battles organize themselves around people who are exactly sure of where they are and what they're doing. He found the first Death Eater who tried to stop him, a masked man with a curse already leaving his wand, green light burning in the air, and redirected the curse with a minimal gesture, the gravity language making the air between them marginally denser so the spell curved and struck the ground harmlessly. He didn't break stride. He found McGonagall holding the entrance hall door against 3 Death Eaters, and she looked at him arriving and the relief in her face lasted exactly 1 second before it transformed into the expression she'd had since the corridor with Hermione, the specific attentiveness of someone who has decided to trust a person and is committing to it completely. "The Great Hall," she said. "Students are inside." "Keep them there," Harry said. "We've got the grounds." She looked at him once more. Then she turned back to the 3 Death Eaters with the expression of a woman who had been a professor for 40 years and was done being argued with today, and Harry left her to it. Voldemort was in the far grounds. Harry felt him before he saw him, that vast, cold presence, enormous and deliberately projected, the psychic equivalent of a shout. He was making himself known, which was strategy. Voldemort's power was partly in the weight of what people felt when they thought about him, and he had spent 15 years making that weight as heavy as possible. Harry walked toward him anyway. The grounds cleared ahead of him in the way grounds cleared when the people in them had functioning self-preservation instincts. Death Eaters saw Harry coming and the ones paying attention to their environment moved away, not because they'd been told to but because there was something about the quality of his movement, unhurried, grounded, utterly without the fear they were accustomed to encountering, that communicated something about the situation that the specific details hadn't yet confirmed. Voldemort was standing at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, robes dark, Nagini coiled at his feet, and he was, tall, Harry registered. And strange-looking, in the way that the pictures in Dumbledore's collected history hadn't fully conveyed, the face that had been remade through dark magic, the red eyes, the flatness of features that had been human once and were now something that wore humanity as a loose approximation. He looked at Harry. Harry stopped 15 feet away. Between them, Nagini raised her head. And then from the tree line, 30 feet to Voldemort's left, a flash of phoenix fire, brief and gold and sudden, and Dumbledore, who had Auror to the position with the very last of whatever Snape had been maintaining in him, brought the sword of Gryffindor down once. Nagini's shriek was brief. Voldemort's reaction was not a sound. It was a stillness, a sudden, complete stillness, as something fundamental shifted in the equation he'd been running since 1942. Harry felt it through the psychic landscape, the severance of the last external Horcrux, the sudden cramped finitude of a man who had spent 50 years building walls against death and had just lost the last of them. Dumbledore collapsed to one knee. He was staying upright through something that was no longer entirely will. Harry could see this from 30 feet away. He was also, clearly, finished. He had done what he came to do. Voldemort turned back to Harry. "You," he said. The voice was distinctive, flat and cold and resonant in a way that normal voices weren't, like something had been removed from it that human voices need. "The boy who always survived." "Not a boy," Harry said. Voldemort's red eyes moved across him. Harry let him look. He did not square up, did not perform any of the readiness he felt, just stood the way Logan had taught him, present, waited, watching. "The fragment is gone from your scar," Voldemort said. He had felt that, then. The removal had registered, distantly, the way losing a piece of something always registers. "You found a way." "Xavier found a way," Harry said. "The mutant," Voldemort said. "You built your power in a house of mutants." Something moved in the red eyes, not contempt exactly, but incomprehension trying to become contempt and not quite making the transition. "Power born of contamination. Power born of people who gave a damn," Harry said. "It's a better origin story than yours." The killing curse came fast, faster than Harry had anticipated, not because he hadn't anticipated speed but because Voldemort was genuinely exceptional at what he did and the academic awareness of that was different from the physical reality of it. The green light crossed the 15 feet of dark ground between them in no time at all. Harry moved the air. Not dramatically. A precise, localized adjustment to the density of the space 3 feet in front of him, gravity tuned sideways, the air thickened to a coefficient that the curse wasn't designed for, and the green light bent, curved off its path, and struck the earth 6 feet to his left. Silence. Voldemort looked at the scorch mark in the ground. At Harry, still standing where he'd been standing. "That's new," Voldemort said. "Several things are," Harry said. He reached with the mind language, not to compel, he wouldn't compel, that was Xavier's first rule and it was a good rule, but to push. To locate the seams in Voldemort's psychic architecture, which were, it turned out, numerous, because a man who had split his soul 7 times and survived the rebound of his own killing curse had a mind with the structural integrity of something that had been reassembled too many times. Harry found the cracks and he pushed against them the way you push against a wall to find where it's weak, not to break it but to know it. Voldemort felt it. His eyes widened fractionally, the involuntary response of someone experiencing something they hadn't modeled. Then 3 more killing curses in rapid succession, and Harry moved through them with the gravity language running at full capacity, bending each one off its path with the focused precision of someone who had been training this ability since he was 6 years old and had spent 18 days calibrating it to the finest control he'd ever achieved. Not dodging, redirecting. The distinction mattered. Dodging was reactive. This was something else. "You can't do this indefinitely," Voldemort said. "I don't need to," Harry said. He brought both languages up together, fully together, the way he'd done in the extraction, the way that multiplied rather than added. The gravity language and the mind-reaching working in concert, and the feeling of it was enormous. The way it always was, but more, because the fragment was gone and the scar was empty and there was nothing in him now that wasn't entirely his own, and the fullness of that, the clean completeness of being only himself with every resource that implied, was something he hadn't had a word for until this moment. The word was free. He pushed outward with everything he had. Not a curse. Not a killing intent. The X-Men didn't kill people they could stop. Logan had been clear about this since Harry was 7, and Harry had thought about it for 10 years and agreed with it independently, which was the only kind of agreement that counted. What he pushed with was presence. The full, undivided, entirely uninhibited weight of everything he was, the gravity language bending the space around Voldemort inward like a lens focusing light, and the mind-reaching pressing against every crack in a fragmented soul with the persistent, irresistible pressure of something whole against something broken, and the magical inheritance from Lily and James Potter adding its own layer. The love and the choice and the sacrifice metabolized into power over 15 years of being raised by people who understood what mattered. Voldemort's wand arm came down. Not because he was disarmed. Because the weight of what Harry was pushing against him was too much. Not physical. More fundamental than physical. The weight of a complete person against a person who had spent 50 years removing pieces of their own soul, and the difference in structural integrity between those two things, was vast. Voldemort went to one knee. Harry walked toward him. "It's over," Harry said. 12 feet. 10. "You haven't killed me," Voldemort said. Between his teeth. The red eyes were still burning, but something in them had changed, the particular quality of someone who is running calculations and finding the answer consistently wrong. "The Horcruxes are gone," Harry said. 8 feet. All of them. The diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, the snake. And the one in my scar, that's gone too. You have nothing left to come back from. 6 feet. "You could kill me now," Voldemort said. "You have the power." "Yes," Harry said. "Then do it." "No," Harry said. Voldemort looked at him with those burning red eyes, from one knee, held down by a gravity that was more than physical, and the expression on his face was something that had no clean name, the expression of a man confronting something that wasn't in his model of how people worked. "Why not?" Voldemort said. "Because I'm not you," Harry said. He looked at Voldemort. Tom Riddle, he thought, the name from Dumbledore's notes and Dumbledore's memory, the boy who had become this through a long accumulation of choices, and he pressed the mind reaching in one more time, carefully, specifically, targeting the central coherence that held what remained of the fractured soul together. It came apart quietly. Not violently. The way something that has been holding tension for a very long time comes apart when the tension is finally released, a slow unbinding, the pieces separating from each other, and Voldemort's eyes losing their light in stages, and the vast cold presence in the psychic landscape diminishing like something going out rather than something being extinguished. Tom Riddle fell forward onto the dark grass of the Hogwarts grounds. He was not dead. Harry checked, he was breathing, barely, the shallow respiration of someone between things. He was diminished. The soul fragments were gone, and what remained was what was left when you removed everything you'd added. Something human. Something that would need to be held accountable, and imprisoned, and never given the opportunity to rebuild. Harry stood over him for a moment. Then he turned. Logan was 20 feet behind him. Had been for the last 10 minutes, Harry realized, following at distance, present but not intervening, which was the Logan of it exactly. Trusting the work. Harry looked at him across the dark ground and Logan looked back, and the expression on Logan's face was something Harry had only seen twice before and had never had a word for until now. Pride. Not proud of you in the simple sense. Something deeper. The kind that a person feels when someone they've known since they were small enough to stand in their ribs proves to be exactly what you believed they were all along, and better than that, and entirely, irreducibly themselves. Harry walked toward him. Around them, the battle was ending. Not with a dramatic crash but with the gradual dying away of something that had lost its engine, Death Eaters dropping wands, the Aurors moving in organized waves, Storm's lightning ending, Rogue and Scott landing, the Hogwarts grounds returning to something recognizable. McGonagall was at the castle door. She looked at Voldemort on the ground and then at Harry and said nothing, which was the McGonagall of it. She would say things later, when the time was right for saying things, and for now her silence carried all of it. Dumbledore was still on one knee at the tree line. Harry went to him and crouched beside him, and Xavier was already there. The chair had come across the grounds with the quiet efficiency of Xavier doing exactly what needed doing, and his hand was on Dumbledore's shoulder. "Nagini?" Harry asked. "Done," Dumbledore said. His voice was thin but steady. All done. You should sit down, Harry said. I find I'm already somewhat close to the ground, Dumbledore said. And the slight, rueful curve of his mouth was so characteristic, so precisely him, that Harry found himself almost smiling despite everything. Let us help you, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. I think, yes. The aftermath was what aftermaths always are, slower than the event, more complicated, louder in the mundane and quieter in the dramatic. Healers came. Aurors came. Scrimgeour came with the expression of a man who had sent 32 Aurors to a Georgian terrace 2 weeks ago and was now standing in the grounds of Hogwarts looking at the man who had just ended a 15-year war and processing several things simultaneously. Harry sat on the steps of the castle entrance, where Rogue dropped down beside him, and Scott settled against the wall, and Storm landed without ceremony, and Logan stood with his arms folded looking at the grounds being cleared. Xavier was nearby, speaking quietly with Dumbledore, who was wrapped in a blanket that Madame Pomfrey had produced with efficient concern. Hermione came out of the castle at some point, pushing through the doors with Ron behind her, and she looked at Harry and her face did something complicated that arrived, eventually, at relief. She sat down 2 steps below him and said, Are you hurt? No, Harry said. Your scar, she said, looking at his forehead. The cut from the extraction had been there, but it was already healing. Logan's healing factor was not something Harry had, but the magical inheritance from his mother had always given his body a resilience that medical professionals found interesting. It's fine, Harry said. It feels, he touched it. Empty. In a good way. She looked at him. It worked. The extraction. Xavier's protocol, Harry said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Ron sat beside her, eating a biscuit from somewhere, because Ron's approach to adrenaline was apparently nutritional. He offered one to Harry. Harry took it. What happens now? Hermione asked. Harry looked at the grounds. At the Aurors collecting wands. At Scrimgeour speaking to 3 of his senior people with the purposeful manner of a man who has just watched the justification for his entire institution restructure itself overnight. At the castle, his mother's school, his inheritance, still standing, intact, catching the first grey suggestion of dawn light on its towers. The ministry changes, Harry said. They don't have a choice anymore. The Auror office as it's been run, the oversight, the authority structures, all of it gets restructured. Scrimgeour knows it. He's already running the numbers. He looked at the biscuit in his hand. Umbridge gets audited. Fudge either leads the reform or he doesn't lead anything. And you? Hermione said. Harry thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, the way he thought about everything, not with the weight of what other people had decided it should be, but with the clean, present attention of someone who had just had 15 years of foreign presence removed from their head and was thinking, possibly for the first time in their life, in a space that was entirely their own. I want to finish the library, he said. Hermione blinked. At Hogwarts. You found 6 more relevant texts in the last week and I've only read 2 of them. He looked at her. And I want to do something about the Department of Mysteries. What they keep in there, how they keep it, who has access, that needs to be looked at. That's not a retirement, Ron observed. I'm 15, Harry said. I'll retire later. You ended a war, Ron said. At 15. With significant help, Harry said. He looked at Logan, who was looking at the grounds with the expression of a man who would absolutely never admit to having complex emotions about this moment and was obviously having several. Enormous, essential, irreplaceable help. Logan didn't look at him. Stop, he said. I'm serious, Harry said. I know, Logan said. Stop anyway. Xavier wheeled over. He had the expression he'd had in the car above the Atlantic, coming back from Surrey, the particular look of someone watching something they believed in being proven right by reality, which was more satisfying than being right in the abstract ever was. Well, Xavier said. Well, Harry said. The fragment is gone. Voldemort is contained. The Horcruxes are destroyed. Xavier looked at him with the entirety of 18 years in his eyes. How does it feel? Harry thought about the cupboard under the stairs, and Captain the One-Armed Soldier, and a flight across the dark Atlantic, and the Institute's chalk and coffee smell, and running in the cold mornings, and the library at Hogwarts, and his mother's handwriting at midnight on old paper. He thought about the letter. I'm not afraid. Like myself, he said. Just, more of it. Xavier smiled. The real one. Good, he said. The sun came up over Hogwarts. Not dramatically, not with the weight of something earned or the performance of something significant. Just the ordinary mechanism of morning arriving on schedule, indifferent to everything that had happened beneath it, dependable in the way that mornings are dependable, which is to say, completely, without exception, always. Harry sat on the castle steps with a biscuit and Rogue on one side and Scott on the other and Logan standing and Xavier nearby and Hermione cross-referencing something and Ron eating and the whole ridiculous, essential, irreplaceable collection of them present and accounted for. He reached into his jacket pocket. Put Captain on the step beside him. The one-armed soldier stood at attention in the morning light, seniority intact. Good job, Harry said, to Captain, to the morning, to nobody in particular and everyone who mattered. The ministry would come later with its questions and its forms and its structural reckoning. Scrimgeour would come with his yellow eyes and his careful pragmatism and the beginning of something better than what had been. Dumbledore would recover, or not, and either way would have been honest when it counted. Voldemort would be held in a place designed for things that should not be allowed to move freely, which was sufficient. The wizarding world would have to decide what it wanted to be now that the shape of its fear had been removed. That was going to be complicated and ongoing and Harry expected to have opinions about it. But that was for later. For now there was morning, and biscuits, and the specific warmth of being surrounded by people who had seen everything you were and simply wanted you to keep being it. Harry Potter sat on the steps of Hogwarts in the first light of a morning that was nobody's prophecy and entirely his own. He was, finally and completely, free.